the city of San Bernardino. Before we go into, this time I would like to ask Hugh Harrison from Loveland Church to come forward. He will offer us our invocation. Please all rise.
May we have an attitude of praise as we go before his throne of grace. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time of Thanksgiving. We thank you, Lord, that we can have voices of thanksgiving. We thank you, Lord, for your word, for it says to give thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, Lord. So we thank you for this season of Thanksgiving. We have so much to be thankful for. We thank you, Lord, for our first responders and the sacrifices that they make. We thank you, Lord, for our mayor. We pray you continue to watch over him and protect him, Lord. We thank you, Lord, for our elected officials, for the city council, for the boards, the commissions, and committees. And we thank you, Lord, for our election process, that we were able to voice our opinions last week. Lord, we praise you and thank you for that. We thank you, Lord, that you have blessed our country. We pray you continue to bless America in a very special way. And we pray for the city of San Bernardino, Lord, that you just continue to make it grow and prosper. So, Lord, we give you all the praise. We give you all the worship because you're worthy to be praised. We thank you, Lord, for our veterans. We thank you, Lord, that you can give peace and comfort and strength to the many individuals who have been displaced by the fires, Lord. We pray you continue to watch over them and protect them. And, Lord, we give you all the honor and all the praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Harrison. Next, we will invite Liliana Munoz to come forward. She's a student at the Yervita Elementary School. She will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Put your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Once again, thank you, Pastor Harrison, and thank you, Liliana. Appreciate your attendance. This time, I'll ask for a report out from City Attorney.
Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public, we do have reportable action from our closed session. Under Section A of your agenda and items 2 through 9, the City Council approved settlements by a vote of 4-0. We had council members Barrios, Charette, and Mulvihill were absent. On item B, we had direction to the negotiator, our city manager, approved by a vote of 4-0. With item C, we approved 2 cases for settlement, and item D was continued. That's all the reportable action that I have. I would like to mention that settlement agreements in these cases are available to the public once they are finalized. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. We have no appointments this evening. We'll move into presentations, and we'll invite Councilmember Valdivia to come forward to present Citizen of the Month.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call Paul Sanborn up. Paul, it gives me great pleasure and delight to present this certificate of recognition to the most outstanding citizen of the month in November of 2018. I appreciate all of your concerns, your involvement in our community. I love Paul because he'll shoot straight from the hip. And some people like it, and more people love it. And I just really appreciate all of your community involvement. And so today I want to recognize you, sir, from the Mayor and City Council honoring Paul Sanborn, November 2018, Citizen of the Month. Concerned, investor, time talent, involved, zealous, enthusiastic, neighborly. And in recognition of your dedicated service to our community and the affairs and pride demonstrated by the numerous deeds for the benefit of the citizens of San Bernardino, I present you the certificate the 21st day of November.
Okay.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
And also from the State Senate office, Senator Morell, representing the 23rd District, in recognition of this as well. There you are, sir. And also a great pin from the city of San Bernardino. Would you like to say a few words?
I would. Last time I come down here, I had you have one of those moments where you lose your chain of thought. And what I wanted to talk about is Virginia Marquez. The Santa Fe whistle, a lot of people don't understand that didn't grow up in this town. That was our watch. You know, hey, 8 o'clock you had to be in school, noon you eat lunch, and at 5 o'clock it's like, hey, we better get home, it's going to get dark. And we thank you for that. Maybe you could get that clock going before you leave. I'd appreciate it. To you, Mayor, it's been tough. You were dealt a bad poker hand per se, whatever, but hey, you've held it together and whatnot, and I really truthfully hope that you leave it in good position to where John can take it and run with it. There's great things coming for San Bernardino, especially for the next 4 years. Thank you.
And also, isn't he sharp? I mean, I saw him walking the bridge today. I said, "Man, I don't even know you, Paul."
I know it. I clean up well, don't I?
Good to see you. All right, let's take a picture real quick. There you are. Congratulations.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Councilman Valdivia, for the presentation of the Citizen of the Month. And it's my pleasure to invite Richard Jones to come forward. On behalf of the City Council, it's my privilege to issue this certificate of recognition to Richard Jones from San Andreas High School in recognition of your academic achievements. The Mayor and City Council hereby congratulate you and wish you success in all your future endeavors. Presented this 21st day of November 2018. And with this also, we'd like to present this certificate of recognition from our State Senator Richard Jones, from Mike Morrell. You're not the State Senator. Mike Morrell is also recognizing Richard Jones in honor of being selected for the November 2018 Youth Recognition Award by the Mayor and City Council of San Bernardino. I want to thank our school board member, Margaret Hill, for continuing this program and making sure that we recognize our students. And so thank you, Dr. Hill. And so at this time, I'll present this to you together with a pen and ask you if you'd like to say a few words.
I'd like to. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to give thanks on behalf of my family members and myself to Council Member Fred Shorett, Dr. Margaret Hill, Miss Davis from my school, San Andreas High School, San Andreas, and my principal, Mr. Stanton, for nominating me as Student of the Month. And this has only made me want to pursue higher things and achieve and strive for more goals, because this is a great honor and I've had a tough time trying to get here, and I'd like to thank you guys for recognizing me as someone. That's all.
Excuse me, Mayor and Common Council. Can I just say a couple of words on behalf of Richard? Richard's brother, who is a student at Pacific High School, is here. Mom here, who was a student of mine back in the 70s, and Granddad's here. But I also want to say, because I know Councilmember Charrette's not here to read his information, Richard graduated early. He graduated about 2 weeks ago. He is working for Garner Holt. He's in the, what is that, Generation Go program, and he wants to become a computer engineer and work for either Google or Apple. So I know that information is not read today, but I just want to share that. And they just love him dearly at San Andreas. So just want to congratulate him again. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Richard, are you still? Would you like to bring your family up, and would like to have the council have a picture with you? Dr. Hill, if you'd like to join us. Next, we will now open it up for public comments. The first, thank you. Chamber, if you'll come forward.
I was hoping you'd just skip right over, but good evening. On behalf of the San Bernardino Chamber, we wish everyone a safe and happy holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. On Thursday, November 29th, from 5 to 7, the Chamber will be hosting the Business After Hour at the Bethel State Sales, located at 302 Alabama Street. They'll have great networking, door prices, and fabulous food. If you'd like to RSVP, please do so at the Chamber at 909-885-7515. Also on Saturday, December 1st at 7:30, the San Bernardino Symphony is going to be presenting the holiday concert with David Archuleta and held at the California Theater. For tickets, please call 381-5388. And the San Bernardino Chamber office will be closed the month of December. However, the Coffee Klatch will be still held on Wednesdays, December 5th, 12th, and 19th. And also, I'm from the Doubletree here in San Bernardino. Invite all of you to come out and join us for awesome food at the cutting board. We have a new menu coming up, so it starts tonight, and we do have 15% off coupons. So we invite everyone to come out and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. We'll now go into public speaking. The first one is Michael Schaefer.
Good evening. I'm here to speak on agenda item 14, the transfer of Wilson Towing. As you know, I represent Pepe's Tow, and I've had an opportunity to review the agenda packet. I note that Wilson has been operating without the 65,000 square foot outside storage yard for at least 20 years. They didn't have it the last time the council approved the sale in 2012, but now the city is requiring that they have a 65,000 square foot yard. They don't have one on their 3rd Street facility, so they're leasing one from Armada Towing, which is, I suppose, okay. But I see that the council is told that the Wilson facility at 3rd Street, their existing facility, is 50,891 square feet. Well, when I was here in August, the city submitted a report on compliance by the towing companies, and that report says that Wilson has a yard of 29,830 square feet. So which is it? Do they have a 50,000 square foot yard or a 29,000 square foot yard? I'm looking at page 743 of your agenda packet from August the 1st. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Is it a mistake? Maybe. But what other mistakes are being made in reporting to you as to what's going on with the tow companies? Last year, in 2017, Pepe's received a letter from the city saying all tow companies were in compliance. Then Pepe's did their own investigation, presented photographs and information, and in March of this year, the police department reports they're not in compliance, and major capital improvements are needed. What's going on? You don't know. Everybody agrees that these tow yards have to be paved. If you read the report on agenda item 14, it says that Wilson is approved with gravel paving. Well, and they added 4 inches of gravel and sand in order to bring themselves into compliance this year. I have a tape, which I'll leave with the city clerk, showing dust being kicked up this week by vehicles moving around. Nobody knows what's going on. I'm asking that before you approve a sale, that you find out what's going on with these towing companies, because you're not being given the straight information. It's all contradictory and confusing. The aggregate, the gravel, isn't going to stop the oil. The oil from wrecked cars and ground pollution is the reason that tow yards need to have paved yards. Armada doesn't have a paved yard. The police department says it maybe does, but I have pictures here from Google that say something else, which I'd be happy to share with you. I realize my limited time is up. I'm asking you to be careful. Obviously, as you all know, this issue has a lot of people watching it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Ann Johnson?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Johnson's going to speak as part of
excuse
the
me.
last
Thank
item
you.
that I have.
Louis Ojeda?
Hello, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Well, I want to start by saying that I was a little bit confused and surprised this Monday to find out that I have 2 notices of code violations on 2 of my properties in the same block. And but I've been warned about it, because they say, if you are outspoken and you say things that some people maybe won't like, then that's how they operate. But you know what? Instead of me getting upset or mad or, I'm happy and thankful for that. Because thanks to code enforcement, I started doing my community work. Because after a little more than 8 months of me calling them to clean up the lot that was next to my property, I did it myself. And then we've been doing it ever since. So now I want to start watching how code enforcement operates. And it seems like they don't do a good job at all, because Mr. Nichols and Pacine went with us to do a cleanup several weeks ago. And you heard the lady that lives next door, that she called code enforcement for 6 months and they didn't do anything about it. So my properties, I wasn't aware of all the violations. Like I said, been like that for years. I just bought them a little over a year ago. But out of all the block, only my 2 properties were target. They said I called the officer, and she told me that she happened to drive by. And she noticed them. That's okay, you know. I will follow the procedure, whatever needs to be done, we'll do it. But at the same time, if we're going to apply the law, we're going to apply the law across the board. And that goes for the police department, okay, because I talked to Surgeon Demone, or I'm not sure what's his last name. Okay, and he has a very disrespectful attitude, very unprofessional. He hung up on me. I had to call back. It's not that he hurt my feelings or anything like that. I don't really care about it. But if that's the attitude that they have towards the public, I think that is not very professional, and I don't think that we deserve that. When you try to ask a simple question, what's the procedure and what's the guidelines for an officer from code enforcement to target any particular property? So I think that we need to be inclusive and to promote business and small business and entrepreneurship in the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Daniel. Not quite sure what your last name is, Daniel. Thank you. State your name.
Daniel Cadenas. Cadenas. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to have like a little moment of speech towards the We Are the Change organization.
Could you speak into the mic?
I want to have a moment of speech towards the organization that I'm in, which is We Are the Change San Bernardino. I want to say that it was a really big impact on me, and I believe it's a big impact to the city of cleaning up alleys and cleaning up illegal dumpings. And I do believe that our city is really beautiful, and I believe this organization is really helping us out by making us look good and helping us, and providing us to be able to change our community in a good, positive way. And I recently wrote a personal statement to my college, my senior portfolio, about how programs like We Are the Change and programs like the Mr. Cardinal pageant and San Bernardino High School have impacted me on changing my community into a better looking way. And yeah, that's about it. I just want to say that's a perfect way to get community service, and it makes us look good, and we get to show like everyone like what's up with our city with the illegal dumpings and all. Well, thank you very much for this chance.
Jose Gatos. Robert Porter.
Mayor-elect, pretty soon. Council, good people. Good turnout today, team, especially before Thanksgiving. That's great. I mean, gobble, gobble, gobble. Happy Thanksgiving. I just wanted to say that we just went through a super hard battle in our city. And I remember going through this same battle 5 years ago. And in the end, the transition itself for you, Mr. Mayor, was very sound. And I even remember Mayor Morris driving you to work a few times and showing you the ropes, helping it make a better experience for you so you could get started with your feet on the ground and just start pushing. Well, looks like there's going to be a change on December 8th. And I'm hoping that you will extend your hand to Mr. Valdivia and provide that same guidance that Mr. Morris provided to you. This is important because pretty soon he will be your mayor. And you're going to want him to do things the way that will help the whole city. And you're in the city, Mr. Mayor. So if you could lead by example like that and make this transition easy so there's not any more fighting, I would greatly appreciate that from you, sir. I think you did a great job as our mayor. There's a few things I disagreed with, but you stuck to your guns, and I appreciate that. You were a good opponent. And in the end, I don't think anybody won. I think San Bernardino won. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Jim Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council.
Would you turn on the mic, please?
There you go. Yes, worthy mayor, city manager, city council persons, it's a great deal of honor again to say a few words about this wonderful city of San Bernardino. As I've told you before, I moved here in 1944, and I've lived here except for 8 years in the mountains, and I love San Bernardino. I want to first congratulate Paul Sandborg on being Citizen of the Month. I think he's certainly well thought of in the community, and I guess he shoots from the hip. I don't know what it said, but I consider him a friend. Also, I wanted to indicate that there's some really important things happening in San Bernardino. Just recently, a wonderful lady by the name of Denise Benton saw me. She's a member of an organization called the Native Sons of the Golden West, and brought to me the attention that her church was celebrating their 90th anniversary. That's St. Mark's Missionary Church on Central. And last Sunday, the Native Sons presented a very nice marker. You've seen the arrowhead markers around the city, as we did at San Bernardino Valley College on their 90th year. And they were just, the pastor for the entire ceremony was crying. He was so taken. And that's what we need to do more often in the city of San Bernardino, is to recognize people that have had an impact, not just people walking through, but have had a commitment to the city of San Bernardino. And I have some exciting news. The last time that the Native Sons were in the Rose Parade was in 1981. It just so happens, and I think there's an extreme possibility, that in 2019, the Native Sons organization will be again in the Rose Parade. We're not going to have a float. It's going to be, because that's like $300,000. Don't have that type of money. However, we're going to be participating in a fire truck brigade from Amador County. They'll be coming down, and we'll be showing our colors. And it's a positive reflection. Anything that's a positive reflection on the city of San Bernardino, I'm 100% behind. And I'm sure that as we go forward, like one of my sayings, first of all, I never anticipate a negative event. And second of all, the only thing in life that doesn't change is change. And we have to get used to that and go with it for the benefit of the city of San Bernardino. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolina Verduzco?
Good evening, everybody. Originally, I came out here to voice my support for the animal shelter staying in San Bernardino. But due to some things that have come to my attention, I just wanted to, and being that it's going to be Thanksgiving tomorrow, I wanted to come out here and say to the mayor-elect, the now mayor, and the city council, we really need to be thankful for the volunteers in the city. Not just in the city, but the ones that travel from other cities to come here and make this a better place. I think to use our resources to harass volunteers is not efficient. We need people like Mr. Porter, Mr. Ojeda, We Are the Change, Mrs. Chow, people that not only volunteer money and time and their efforts, but are really not looking to do this for a term. We have a long-term commitment to this city because it is the heart of the Inland Empire. So I just want to say, let's see how we can work together and not against each other. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaker slips, City Clerk?
No, sir.
Thank you. This time, we will ask the council if there are any items to hold. Start with Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull number 18.
Councilmember Barrios.
None, Mayor.
Councilmember Valdivia.
None tonight, sir.
Councilmember Nickel.
I would like to pull number 14.
And Councilmember Richard.
None, Your Honor.
All right, do we have a motion? We have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
On the consent calendar, the motion to approve was made by Mr. Valdivia, the second by Mr. Nickel, and the item passes 5-2.
Thank you. Item number 14 is change of ownership for Wilson Towing. Adopt resolution number 2018-307 of the Mayor and City Council of the City of San Bernardino, approving the change of ownership of Wilson Towing in order to continue participation in the San Bernardino Police Department tow rotation. Councilmember Nickel.
Yeah, I've received a number of comments from constituents on this as well. There do appear to be some discrepancies in terms of the information that has been provided to this council prior to tonight's meeting and the supporting documentation. There's also been some discrepancies in terms of what type of surface is required for tow yards. I do have a question. We now have new legal counsel with BB&K. I do understand that there is either the potential of litigation or perhaps litigation related to this matter. I would request respectfully that our new legal counsel have an opportunity to review the facts and the matters surrounding this to ensure that we do have a good, thorough legal review of the facts, the facility as it exists, to ensure that we aren't jeopardizing ourselves in terms of any future additional litigation. I think it's warranted. I've been very impressed with the counsel we've received through BB&K, and I think it would be appropriate to ask them to look into this matter and investigate whether or not there are in fact discrepancies and whether or not there is any deviation from the requirements as are required either under law or subject to the agreement that currently exists. Thank you.
Chief, you want to respond? Do you have any comments related to the issue?
Well, I can comment on what the attorney for Pepe's brought up in terms of the square footage. We acknowledge that the square footage for the lot itself at Wilson Tow does not meet the 65,000 square foot requirement. That's the reason it was delayed in coming to you. The existing agreement requires that we bring these agreements to the council for approval within 30 days. The delay was in straightening out that square footage issue. And ultimately, it satisfied staff and it satisfied legal at that time that the leasing of the other property satisfied that requirement. And then in addition to that, the aggregate material, the code calls for an improved surface. I understand that there is obviously a difference between the crushed gravel or the aggregate versus a hard asphalt surface. According to our own folks through community development, when we have researched this issue, they've signed off that the aggregate material was sufficient. So based on that, we presented that within the staff report, and by code, or by the existing agreement, we are required to bring that to the council for the transfer of the ownership.
Okay, I would Working? Hello? So, yeah, I would just move to continue this item to allow BB&K to investigate the matter, to ensure that we aren't setting ourselves up for any potential legal liability. I am concerned about aggregate material as opposed to a hard surface. I've received different information, even in the context of this council and public session. I'm not satisfied tonight that I have a clear understanding of what the requirement in fact is, and I would like to get legal counsel's opinion on what the requirements are, both in terms of any state or federal legal requirements. So I would just ask for continuance of this item to the next meeting to allow BB&K to conduct a thorough examination of the facts to ensure that we aren't exposing ourselves to liability. I would make that motion to continue.
Doesn't seem to be any support for your motion. City Manager, you have any?
No, we don't disagree. Our goal is always to make sure that the council is comfortable with all the information that's been presented. We certainly don't want to put anyone in a position where they're taking action on something if they don't feel that they've had all the information that's been presented to them. I would say, though, that we're trying to bring this to you because we have a requirement to do so. So we delayed it as long as we felt that we could. Legal counsel has been consulted as we prepared this item for your review this evening, and feels comfortable with the item as we've presented it. But again, certainly if you would like additional information, we can provide that.
To add to that is that we did review the staff report as staff prepared it to make sure that it complied with the code. The attorney who spoke tonight is representing another competing tow company who has filed litigation against the city, both in federal and state court. I have not had an opportunity to look specifically at the issues that he addressed, although, we did look at the staff report. One thing I would just like to say to the City Council as we address the potential litigation is this. I think it's very unfortunate as a city attorney and for you as City Council members that we fight over towing operations and that we spend the city's revenues and money over tow truck companies who can't get along, who hire lawyers to sue us. I feel very strongly about that. So it was my goal to work with staff and to work with the towing companies to see if they can all just get along so that we can get our business done, because it's the police department and residents of the city who use the services. I don't normally say things like this, but I feel very strongly about it. We have a federal lawsuit and a state lawsuit because we can't get tow companies to work together. So I would say in this message that I would hate to have this particular attorney who's representing Pepe's amend that lawsuit or do something more to get us more tangled up in litigation. Perhaps if I did have an opportunity to more fully understand, staff has done their job. They were required to bring this item to you. They legally had to do it. If I had a little more time to maybe try to better understand the issue, and maybe we could resolve this as I'm trying to resolve the litigation as well. That's all I have to offer.
What's the timing of the current agreement as far as its term? When does it expire?
My understanding is the term was extended for another 5 years recently.
Yeah, it was 2017, I believe. We brought it back to the council, and it was extended for 5 years. The existing agreements were extended for 5 years.
Thank you. We have a motion to move the item. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. We call for the vote.
On item 14, the motion was made by Mr. Valdivia, the second by Ms. Marquez, and the item passes 4-1 with Mr. Nickel voting no.
Thank you. Next is item number 18. This is to adopt ordinance number 1509, adding Chapter 2.03 to Title II of the San Bernardino Municipal Code, establishing procedures for filling city council and mayoral vacancies. Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Your Honor. I pulled this item because I reread the backup a third time, and every time I read it, I get something more out of it. Under discussion, the last sentence, Section 51 provided that a vacancy of the mayor's office would be filled through appointment by a majority vote of the city council. I'd like to have this office elected by the people. So this way we're consistent with both the city council and the mayor.
So you're making a motion to amend the
Yes.
resolution to include that the mayor's office would be filled also by election.
As opposed to being
consistent
appointed.
with the current way that we elect and the way that we would fill vacancies.
Yes, sir. That is my motion.
Thank you.
And I would just note, this was brought to you a couple meetings ago. The request was that we follow the old or the former charter provisions. Frankly, we didn't have those in front of us, but we prepared an ordinance for you that was accepted for first reading at your last meeting. This is the final reading. So if there is a substantive change like that, we would need to go back and develop a, right.
So the time clock would start over.
Right. Now, we certainly can do it as an urgency ordinance and then do it concurrently with first and final reading if there's a concern for the timing. But again, we would need to just make sure we follow the correct processes. This was scheduled this evening for a final reading and adoption.
Okay. Then my motion remains.
With the argument essentially indicating that, if I understand, that this makes it consistent with the way that we're going to fill a vacancy for the city council.
That's correct. Both
Following the same
positions.
pattern with which we currently operate.
Right.
With the constituency voting for both mayor.
Right.
And the city council as they currently do under the normal cycle.
That's correct. This way we're consistent.
Thank you. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. Call for the vote. Councilman Valdivia.
Yeah, so point of order to Ms. Marquez. The item, I'm a little confused. You're saying the last sentence in what section, Ms. Marquez? Page 5062?
Discussion, Section 51 provided that a vacancy of the mayor's office would be filled through appointment by a majority vote of the city council. And I'm amending that to have the position of the mayor to be elected by the people, just like we elect city council members, so we're consistent.
So, Ms. City Manager, the recommendation by Ms. Marquez is only if there is a vacancy in the mayor's office. Is that right?
Right.
And so,
This section of the code only pertains to vacancies in elected official positions, mayor and council positions. So it is only in the event that there's a vacancy that's created in that particular position.
no, but her particular concern is that the mayor's office versus being appointed by the majority of the council
Yes.
electing the mayor.
I think, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, I think what she's suggesting is the council directed that we prepare an ordinance that if there were a vacancy, consistent with the former charter, if there were a vacancy created in a council office, that it would be filled by a vote of the community. I think what she's suggesting, and please.
No, you're on the right track, Ms. Miller. The key word is vacancy.
Right, and if there's a vacancy in the mayoral position, I think what she's suggesting is that that should also be filled not by a vote of the council, but by a vote of the people.
So my concerns are the vacancy of the mayor's office. For instance, what creates those vacancies? And maybe our city attorney can help us with some legal advice here. The vacancies of the office might be death. Could be elected to another office or appointed to another office.
Correct.
What provisions might there be with the vacancy of a particular elected office?
Death is the obvious one, but normally conviction of a felony, we automatically vacate an office. If you resign, if you are absent from the duties of the position, to the extent that, I go through the whole list. It's like a law school exam. I can tell you there's incompatible offices. There's a variety. Some are more likely than others.
But it would be consistent with the same way vacancies are established in
Sure.
the council seats.
And who has the authority and powers to undergo the proceedings of the vacancy? Would it be the mayor pro tem and the council? How do we establish and begin the discussion for a vacancy? Say, for instance, it's incompatibilities. of some sort? Or
That there, well, if it was incompatibility, it'd be a little bit different. There would have to be a full investigation, but if someone passes away, it becomes fairly obvious, and then in that case, the mayor pro tem would then just undergo beginning the vacancy filling process.
So this is a hypothetical, and I appreciate Ms. Marquez bringing this to our attention, that this is complete hypothetical.
Yes.
That if there is a vacancy created, that we would go through the special election process. Since we're down that road of hypothetical, Ville, what are the costs associated with the special election? Can we retain the appointed mayor via the council selection process until there is the next fulfillment? Because I think the answers here are vague. There is no explanation.
So there are some state law provisions, and Sonia certainly can chime in. There are some state law provisions about how that happens. Right now, the mayor pro tem would preside until a new mayor, depending on whether you decide that that's going to be an elected mayor or whether it's appointed, but until that new mayor is in that position.
So as you may recall, we're going to go back in time a little bit. We had originally proposed for you the state laws because we felt like they were state laws, they were general laws, they were good laws, they're laws that are followed and interpreted. And so we presented that to you. You wanted to go back to your original charter, and that's what we presented for you. Your original charter language is not as clear as the state laws, but if you wanted to go back to the state laws, we could do that. We just need to have a new first reading on that section, if that's something that you wanted to do. So it really is a decision. It's up to you as to how you want to fill it. But if the way your old language read, which is your new proposed language, then your vacancy shall be filled by the city council by majority vote.
So I think, look, Ms. Marquez, I would support this had it been brought to our attention prior. My only concern and apprehension now is that we have other elected officials taking seats soon. What are the ramifications here of our decision to go with Ms. Marquez's recommendation here on the motion? We'd have a first and second hearing, and what are the delays?
Right. Well, given the sensitivity, there are a couple of options. You could adopt it as is tonight and direct that we return with an urgency ordinance at the next meeting, correcting that one section so that it was consistent with a vote of the community, similar to the way you've directed that we handle councils. You could say, we don't want to do that, and ask us to bring an urgency ordinance back at the next meeting that accomplishes all of it, because it would have the same force and effect. If we were to do that, in any urgency case, we would also present to you a first reading. We think it's best practice, and BB&K does this regularly. I would always recommend that we always do the urgency and a regular first reading too. But again, you have choices. You can either adopt this and direct that we return with an urgency ordinance and a first ordinance that corrects it, or you can.
Would there be delays
There
on
would
that?
be, either way, there would be no delay.
No delay.
In either of those scenarios. Yeah.
All right. Well, I almost feel that it might be even the opportunity for the new council to determine that. That allow, let this stand for right now, and thereafter the swearing in, allow the opinions of those newly elected officials to take seat. We could always revisit this then also, right? Couldn't we?
You
Yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
can.
You retain the authority to
Sure.
amend your ordinance if and when you want, as long as we follow.
And
first
for
reading,
that
second
matter, you
reading.
could have the new council deal with all of it. I mean, the new council could certainly deal with this entire, if you wanted to have the new council address that.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion? Call for the vote.
Could the clerk read the motion again, just so I'm clear?
I believe that the motion was to approve the ordinance, except changing the language regarding the vacancy in the office of the mayor to be consistent with the ordinance that says that consistent with the previous ordinance for council, so that filling the vacancy would be done by election of the people, not by appointment.
And I would
And I'm
only-
sure she said it much more elegantly than I did.
And I would only seek, if that's approved, I would seek clarification whether you're adopting this ordinance and then directing us to return with an urgency ordinance. Yeah,
So
well, and that would be up
And
to
that
you.
was not my understanding.
And there's different ways you can do that. So just let me give you options. If there's a provision in here that you don't want to adopt, that a majority doesn't want to adopt, we could pull it out, have the second reading on what was in there, and move forward. You can alternatively say, no, we want to send it back. You're not supposed to make substantive changes to ordinances. You have to go back to go and have a new first reading. So I think city manager is recommending if you do, this motion were to pass, you are in effect sending it back to staff to come back to you with an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance.
Councilman Nichol?
Okay, so just point of clarification. So we could go ahead and move a motion to approve this, strike that section of the ordinance, and we could still move forward with the final reading?
What we would in essence do, if you were going to do that, is I would be coming back to you with an urgency ordinance anyway to make that happen. So
Okay. Well, I think my biggest concern is I don't want to delay the process since we are going to have a council vacancy coming up very, very quickly. I want to make sure that we can move forward on that and that we'll bring back an urgency ordinance and correct it later. So if we can do that, I would feel more comfortable.
could you consider amending your motion to approve this ordinance at second reading as it is, but direct staff to work on coming back with another ordinance which would do what you recommended? If you-
I can handle that as long as both the positions of mayor and city council are elected by the people.
Yeah. So we just would start with a brand-new ordinance after this is
Anyways,
done.
right?
We'd come back and make that change for you, because that's not the urgency that's
That's a
driving this.
compromise.
Right, okay.
That.
All right, so you want to restate the ordinance, or the motion?
To approve the ordinance, but direct staff, approve the ordinance on the second reading, but direct staff to come back with an ordinance, an urgency ordinance that has the mayor elected, a mayor vacancy elected. Right. To come back with an ordinance that has the mayor's position elected.
Is that your? Yes. Okay.
But
So
it's not
that's-
an urgency ordinance, it's just an ordinance. Is that, okay.
You know, we'll deal with, but we think it's a regular ordinance.
All right, so you're agreeing, and are you okay with the second? All right, so we have a motion and a second to come back with an ordinance to adopt a vacancy by the vote of the people versus the council. Okay. Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, sir. So just a point of clarification, we're going to do this tonight as is because of the urgency to create, to identify the vacancy. Ms. Marquez, when are you suggesting that it come back? Because there's a directive clause here that we're directing city manager and Sonia to worry about that on the aspects of Ms. Marquez. So are you suggesting that's coming back before the new council comes, or
We
way
can
after?
bring it back to we can bring it the next meeting, because it literally will take us a minute to fix it. Yeah, now it's very simple, so we can bring it back at the next meeting.
December 5th.
Yeah, because again, it's a very quick fix at that point. Yeah, right.
The second reading would be?
The subsequent meeting, so the 19th.
The new council. So it would cross over.
And adopted by a subsequent.
So I would prefer, if it's okay, Ms. Marquez, can we, I understand where the sentiment of this, and I'm still trying to grapple with it, so I'm beg your indulgence here. Would it be possible, and thank you, Ms. City Attorney, for the recommendation of Ms. Marquez, would it be possible then just to have a clean cut and get this on the books now, today, and it be active, and then the new council deliberate those discussions when the new council, and direct council then? So I'm with you like 90% of the way here. I'm almost there. I'm just saying, can we have the new council? So I'd like to say that, maybe December 19th, when the council, that's when you reintroduce it back to the council, and they can pick up the clause of the mayor shall be elected. If that would be your pleasure, so we.
I mean, they could also just deal with an urgency ordinance right after they're seated that deals with all of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I don't want to delay. We have other business matters, December 5th and December 9th.
Let's focus on this today, right now. I'd say move on this issue.
Okay, but I still need your, I can't, can we, my position is that I'd like to see this come back December 19th. So yes, now today, but direct council to come back December 19th with the final caveat of the special
I
election.
thought that was the plan, to come back on the 19th anyway, for final reading, if we vote on it like today.
Right,
And that
but it
would be
would
the
come
time.
back on the 5th for the first reading.
That's correct.
Right, and that's your intent.
Yes, that's my request from my
Okay.
colleagues.
Right, Councilman Barrios.
Well, hello. Okay. No, I just want to, as you guys are talking about the issue, and what I'm thinking that we should have, or the council should have the option or opportunity to choose whether they want an election or appointee at the time of a vacancy. Because if, let's say, there's a vacancy 3 or 4 months before an election, an actual election, why would you want to elect and then 4 or 5 months later do another election? And just food for thought here.
Well, and we don't disagree with you. If you recall, 2 meetings ago, we actually presented the state law provisions which allow for that, and several provisions adopted in other cities that give you the opportunity to develop an even different system. At the time, the council did not want to do that. The council directed us to return with an ordinance that created the opportunity to elect council positions and to appoint the mayor vacancy, if that were to occur.
And with the council, I agree with that, but as far as with the mayor's position is what I'm kind of getting at, since we're changing it up already, or electing to make that change to have an election versus being appointed. There may be situations where an appointee is much more financially sound, better decision than having an election. Do you understand what I'm saying as far as?
I do, but don't you want to remain consistent?
Well, at what cost? You know, I mean, if we're going to have an election and then go through the whole process a few months later, you know, I'm just putting my thoughts out there for you guys to consider. That's all, Mayor. Thank you.
And just for process, and if Councilmember Barrios has support on that, we would have to go through the same process that the city attorney and I just described to you. We'd either have to return with an urgency ordinance if you want to address the council vacancy at that same time. If you don't want to, then we'll return with a different ordinance amending that. So again, same process if you choose to make that change.
Councilman Nichol?
Yeah, well, I think regardless of whatever action we take, the new council will have the opportunity to either affirm or not affirm what we move forward with tonight during the second reading. So I don't think it makes much difference whether or not we start over with the new council or we allow them the opportunity to affirm or not affirm what we do tonight. It has the same effect. So I would prefer that we move forward with the floor motion, and we'll have a second reading with the new council, and we'll see if we're still on the same page. We'll take care of it. If not, then we'll revisit it.
So your motion stands?
It does, Your Honor.
All right, so the motion is that this will be adopted as is, and you're directing the city manager to come back, to bring back another ordinance to amend and allow for the election of a mayor in the event of a vacancy to be conducted through a special election.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
On item 18, the motion to approve was made by Ms. Marquez, the second by Ms. Richard, and the vote is 3-2 with Mr. Barrios and Mr. Valdivia voting no.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask for some indulgence? I try not to ever do this since I come up with the order of the agenda. But now I want to change, because it's my prerogative to change my mind. Only because we have Mary Ann in the audience. She's been a great partner. Would it be possible, and she was going to speak during public comment, and I said, no, can you speak, can you wait? So may we take agenda item 21 before we go on to Brent's riveting financial year end report?
I would be willing to make that motion if it's required that we move forward and take item 21 next.
I'm sure Mary Ann has
I don't think that
ties.
it's necessary. We can change the order. So-
Mayor and council, I'm so sorry, but I think we looked at this issue once before. I ran back to look at the charter. You need 4 votes of your city council to approve. So I just wanted to clarify. I talked to the clerk. It means that the motion, the vote that was taken, that it failed, means you don't have a second reading of an ordinance, means you don't have a process to fill your vacancy. Just wanted to make sure you understood.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Ms. City Attorney. So the opportunity, as I understand, to clarify, Mr. Nickel, we can move to reconsider the item, and Mr. Nickel we can pick up a compromise vote and move it forward.
Potentially, yes.
Consider your vote failed, so that means you can start.
So we can put forward another motion.
Yes.
All right. So did you want to put forward another motion?
Well, hold on, Mr. Mayor, if I may. I wasn't done.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Nickel, I'm a little confused. You had suggested that the floor motion, not the substitute motion, you'd be supportive of. So the floor motion on item number 18 is as is, and we pass that, and allow the new council to take action.
Correct.
Would that be your motion?
Yes.
The floor motion of stated in number 18, is that right, sir?
No, go ahead.
Well,
You were referring to
caveat that we'll come back with.
a second reading on the 19th.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, but the floor motion of the night, of what's printed here today?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So what we would do is we would go ahead and move forward with striking that language, okay? And so we'll start the clock again, right? So there'll be another second reading. So we can at least move forward, get this in place so that.
You'd have to bring that back in
Right.
the form of an urgency ordinance at the next meeting.
Yeah, but if we move the floor motion as it exists in the agenda,
As is.
yeah, so-
tonight, then
so
you will have an ordinance that's in effect.
we'll have an
and you
ordinance
can
in place.
But I want to clarify that we would not be then striking any language.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
Not striking any language.
right.
Directing us to come back with another ordinance on the 5th that would have a final
Correct.
reading on the.
And then that starts tolling again, so we have a new reading at the next one.
Correct.
So what happens is we have in place an ordinance that allows us to fill that council vacancy immediately. And that
And that's
will
what we
carry
need to
over.
do.
Right, right. So that's where I'm coming from. So if we approve the floor motion tonight, we'll get another
Draft
item
this.
that comes
Yep.
back, first reading at the next council meeting,
Yes.
changing the language of filling the vacancy of mayor from one that's elected by the council to one that's elected by the voters of the city. Then that will then bridge over to the new council in terms of its second reading, and we won't lose the opportunity to move forward on filling the
Great,
vacancies on
say
the
no
council.
more, sir. Motion, and I'll support it.
All right, cool. Thank
So
you.
we have a motion. We have Councilmember Marquez.
I'm a little bit confused. Okay, we've gone through this probably for the last 20 minutes. That's your substitute motion, council member?
It's not a substitute. The
It's-
other one
it's-
failed.
Right,
And so
my
this
motion
is-
failed.
This motion is being put forward, that the ordinance is currently.
As is.
As is, will be adopted with the direction to come back with an amendment for the changing of the selection of filling the mayor's position in the event of a vacancy with an election versus an appointment. But that would come back on the next one. This ordinance would be put in place tonight.
Okay,
And then we'll get a new one at the.
that the mayor and city council would be elected by the people, because that's what I want.
Right, not with this ordinance, though. This ordinance, as it's currently written, will elect the city council vacancy, and a mayor's vacancy would be an appointment.
And that's what
they'll
I don't
come back,
want.
And you're giving direction. If you take Councilman Nichols' recommendation and his motion to then direct the city manager to come back with an amendment to then change the from appointment to
To
election for a mayor.
Now I
Okay?
get it. I passed the quiz. Thank you.
All right. So we have a motion, we have a second. Call for the vote.
If you'd like. You can't? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Your voice vote quickly?
Now let's push your buttons.
No buttons.
Okay. Voice vote it is. Ms. Marquez?
Yes.
Mr. Barrios?
Yes.
Mr. Valdivia?
Yes.
Mr. Nichol?
Yes.
Ms. Richard? Yes. Item passes.
Thank you. We will now move to item number 21, the request of the city manager. This is recommendation to review and discuss J.P. Morgan Chase Advancing Cities Challenge and application for funding and authorize the city manager to execute on behalf of the city correspondence supporting the application by the Making Hope Foundation representing the San Bernardino Advancing Cities Collaborative. Mary Ann Johnson?
Well, I'm going to say just a couple things first, and then Mary Ann's going to
Thought
speak
you
to
wanted
the
her to
collaborative.
speak.
I know, well, I didn't want her to go home, because then I would have to do all the speaking.
We
So
should let her speak now. She'll go home sooner.
I know, but I want to provide some context. So indulge me on that too. J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation, great opportunity. They have the Advancing Cities Initiative, and they're seeking to invest in solutions that improve opportunities in communities and revitalize communities. As the council is aware, we have a great partnership with our school district, the university, San Bernardino Valley College, our county, and workforce development. We've undergone a lot of challenges over the last several years, and I think independently, we all started looking at this and thought there were opportunities here for San Bernardino. The city by itself, though, as I looked at this, the city by itself certainly could not fill all the obligations under this and certainly would not be competitive. But we were fortunate that the County of San Bernardino, Workforce Development, and the school district really have those mechanisms in place to enrich the lives of young people. And so we've developed a collaborative. The school district is involved. Mary Ann's going to walk through that, but we have a really great opportunity here to hopefully attain a grant of about $3 million over the next 3 years. So again, great opportunity. Mary Ann's going to walk through it, and really what we're asking for is support for this program.
All right, so I'll do it as brief as I can. I'm Mary Ann Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Workforce Development Department for the county. I also sit on the board for the Making Hope Happen Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of the school district. For this grant, only nonprofits are eligible to apply, which is why Making Hope Happen Foundation is taking the lead for us. What the program's going to be called is Uplift SB. The Uplift means uniting partners to help local individuals and families thrive. We have a number of partners who have signed on already to do this. Making Hope Happen Foundation, the county, obviously. Loma Linda University has agreed to do the evaluation component for us, which is a mandated part of the grant. We're also working with National Core, which is the Hope Through Housing up in Arrowhead Grove, and the Housing Authority of San Bernardino, as well as San Bernardino Valley College. There do need to be two components for the grant, so we're working on both the workforce employment component as well as the neighborhood communities thriving component. What we're looking to do with this, we're using LIFT as our acronym for it because we are government, all of us, we love acronyms. So we're looking to launch the workforce into local careers. We're going to do that by working with our existing America's Job Centers to help serve even more residents through the office over in San Bernardino, as well as enhancing the Generation Go program. You all presented an award earlier to Richard, who's actually our star intern so far in the program. He was in our first pilot. He's one of 2 interns that got hired after doing his internship over the summer. That program is going citywide so that all high school seniors in the city are going to end up with internships. This grant is supposed to help us be able to grow that. We're also looking at inspiring investment in housing, both affordable housing and inspiring home ownership, and trying to put some programs in place in order to trigger that. Looking at fostering collective impact, which is getting all of these partners that have already signed on, as well as additional ones to help us do this work over the next 3 years. And then thriving together with our neighbors. One of the pieces of the grant that we've written in is that there are a lot of community health workers that already exist here in San Bernardino. We want to add some training for them, as well as develop some additional ones that would actually be able to learn the workforce component that could be doing that out in neighborhoods. So you don't always have to go to a place, but you'll have resources right there in your neighborhood. And we're partnering with Loma Linda with their existing promotores training that we could add to that. So that's kind of an overview of what we're trying to do with the grant. What we're asking tonight is for you to be able to offer a letter of support so that you're listed as a partner in the grant application, which is due on the 30th of November.
City Manager?
Yes.
Any other comments?
No, our role is really to support these efforts, but it's also to, I know, but I'm going to say something anyway, and you know that. Part of this is really encouraging young people. We have lots of opportunities in the city of San Bernardino. We have lots of major employers with some very positions that pay well, and our goal really is to ensure that we're training our young people and our residents to remain in their community and invest in their communities. In order to do that, we've got to provide the housing that supports that so that they have good choices when they're deciding where they ultimately want to raise their families. So we realize that we need to focus on our code enforcement efforts. That's why we've spent a lot of time talking about the mechanisms that we use to gain compliance. We're looking at new housing development, but we can't build our way out of the housing situation that we have. So we realize we need to keep reinvesting in our housing stock. We have some terrific programs through our CDBG and HUD-funded programs where we actually have loans and grants to homeowners to improve their properties. So again, we'll continue working in that vein to support their efforts and collaborate with them to also provide those internship opportunities because government and local government in particular is really one of those areas that's struggling to attract young people. It's not cool to be a city manager, and so we need to focus on. I know, shocking, it's shocking, but again, we want to provide those opportunities because we have technical employees, we have our public works staff, we have engineers, architects that are on staff, lawyers. Again, we think there are a lot of opportunities in local government. We need to groom that next generation. So not only dealing with the housing stock, but also being a partner in providing internship opportunities for young people in our community.
Thank you. Councilor Valdivia.
Thank you. Mary Ann, I really appreciate your presentation, and I think this is a great program. I do have a couple questions. The $3 million, is there a timeline as to when it might be rolled out? When is it granted? And kind of provide some commentary on that.
We do have a chart that kind of defines that for you, and
good.
we're continuing to work on this, so it is kind of a draft.
By the way, we don't have this in our packet, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
It was originally, we were going to call it SB Rise, and what happened is when I met with Reg Javier, who's my boss yesterday, he said you need to Google LA Rise, and I did, and it's almost the same thing. So we immediately came up with a new name, which is why today it's Uplift SB. But I think what you have, it still says SB Rise, but that's
Okay.
where it's coming from.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the timeline.
Yep.
So this is dispersed in 3 payments, not to exceed $3 million.
Correct,
If-
it'd be $1 million a year for
Okay.
3 years.
And is this a federal program or what? Walk
Through
us.
JP Morgan Chase.
So it's a private
private,
industry, private
correct.
banking.
Yep.
And who sits on this committee? Do members of our city council, do we have the opportunity to sit and be a part of this discussion, or are we just?
The collaborative is all the administrative agencies of the county, the city. So at this point, it's been administrative. The grant, ultimately, all the programs that the city is providing potentially through this program would have to come before the council to be approved. So, I mean, that, yes, you have involvement as you're approving programs that are going to be funded.
My only concern is, and I'd like to make a strong recommendation, a member from the council should be part of these discussions. I think it's very important that we have council deliberations here present so we can work collaboratively with our administrative offices. But I think this is great, good for our team, and appreciate this. Can you somehow maybe help
I can
with
see
that?
how we can do that, but again, I mean, these are programs that are in existence that we're looking to expand. Most of the programs are through the county, through the school district. So again, we can look at maybe creating a
There is a small
policy-making
work group,
component.
there's a small work group that stared to form that potentially we've talked about adding leaders
Right.
as we move forward. We've had two meetings.
More of a
so-
policy
Okay,
group.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I would really advocate that our city council or the mayor's office be a part of these conversations and discussions. We want to lend a hand of support, and we want to certainly, I move the floor motion on this, but I think we also need to be part of that discussion. If we could be part of that to collaborate and partner, it would certainly allow us, we want to support you, but we also want to be part of the conversation. And I think that makes for good policy. Thank you.
We have a motion, and a second. Do we have a second? We have and a second from Councilmember Richard. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we call for the vote.
On item 21, the motion was made by Mr. Valdivia, seconded by Ms. Richard, and it passes 5-2, or 5-0, I'm sorry, with 2 absent.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Mary Ann. We appreciate your attendance. We'll now move to item number 19. This is to receive and file reports on the financial operating results for 2017-18, the 10-year financial plan, and an update on the fiscal impacts of the changes in the service delivery related to the City Attorney's Office, and adopt Resolution 2013-308 of the Mayor and City Council of the City of San Bernardino establishing a general fund reserve policy.
Mayor, members of the council, this is part of our ongoing efforts to keep the council informed about where we are in terms of budget changes. Brent is going to be speaking about the 17-18 year, and I would note that we are in the 18-19, but again, it's important that we review where we've been and where we anticipate we will be going in the future based on our current spending and current revenues. So Brent's going to walk through a whole variety of items here this evening, and we'll answer any questions that the council has.
I would recommend retitle the item the riveting financial report of 17-18. Nope, there we go. It was not on, but it is now. Okay. Ooh, boy, that has been riveting so far, obviously. I want to run through briefly the agenda for this evening. This evening sounds like a longer item for my time at the podium here. As Andrea indicated, the first and primary focus is the operating results for 17-18, which is last fiscal year. We're going to then explore 3 other topics that are related to the financial affairs of the city, the 10-year financial plan, bring back the information on the city attorney's office service delivery changes and the fiscal impacts associated with that. And then lastly, which we've talked about a number of times here in the last year, is adopting a general fund reserve policy to help guide the conversation as we talk about reserves on a regular basis. Jump right into the first main subject tonight. Remind you that the budget for 17-18 was adopted in June of 2017. It was adopted with a minor surplus of $108,000 at the point of adoption. At that point in time, the opening reserves were $31 million, $25 million of which was the available reserve. $6 million of that was earmarked, set aside, restricted, whatever you want to call it. We thought we needed for handling bankruptcy-related costs for administration and settlements. And so $25 million was available, but the total was $31 at that time. Subsequent to adoption, the budget was amended throughout the year for various things, the primary item being the carryover process, which happens each year, and brings some of the prior year costs into the new year. And so at the end of the year, at the end of the budget year, the amended budget was actually a deficit position of $1.1 million. And so we swung from $100,000 surplus to a 1.1 deficit that if the budget came true exactly dollar for dollar, we would have drawn on reserves by $1 million. The good news part of that is that didn't occur that way, and we have a projected estimate of $8 million surplus generated from fiscal year 17-18. We'll explore that in more detail as we go along here. The revenue component of that is nearly $7 million of positive budget variance. The expenditure side is a positive variance or savings of a little over $10 million. And that $17 million positive item is offset by a few items on the expenditure side, which was the BK bankruptcy expenditures of a little over $6, which interestingly was fairly spot on with the $6 million we had set aside for that. Capital expenditures of almost $1.5 million, and then the budget deficit I mentioned of about $1.1 million. When we put all that together in the mix, you come up with a little over $8 million that we're adding to the reserve for operations for 17-18. Okay, there you go. And so when you add that $8 million to the 31 from the prior year, you end up with $39 million. That's pretty straightforward math. A very positive result, but at the same time, as we've said every time, you have to throw a caveat or disclaimer on that, because the question is, how much is an appropriate reserve? Is $39 million enough? Is it not enough? And so, and there's no right answer to that question. It's a policy question, obviously. But whether we have enough, or do we have enough for replacement and deferred maintenance kind of costs, those are the questions that need to be addressed in the context of a reserve discussion. And a reserve policy would be designed to help facilitate that conversation and give some structure to facilitate the conversation, I guess. And that's what's being proposed later this evening when I get to the fourth item on the agenda. We'll walk through the revenue highlights for that positive $7 million variance that you can see at the top of the slide there. We'll just talk through some of the details of what makes up that $7 million of good news. Most revenue items had positive outcomes in relation to budget, but there are a couple at the bottom there that had negatives, and we'll talk about those as well. The first item, the biggest single item, was the property tax VLF revenues. We've talked about that a lot this year as we renegotiated the agreement with the county fire district for the sharing arrangement, and that was a $1.8 million windfall to us basically each year. The budget for 17-18 included that, it planned for that, but what creates the budget surplus in a positive manner is that the 16-17 was recovered as well. So that $1.8 million from 16-17 was also received in 17-18. And so that with some old back taxes that were collected gives you the $2.4 million of good windfall news for last year. The next item is charges for services and licenses and permits. Those basically consist of fees that we collect for different services we provide, and they're put together because it was the same explanation. Basically, we budget conservatively for that because you don't want to plan for too much revenue, set expenditures, and then not meet it and then have to make cuts. But that's largely driven by development-related activities, and we had a good year from a development standpoint in that regard. The next item is franchise fees of $1.1 million, and that is primarily Burtec. Good news in that regard. When this budget was set in the end of the 16-17 year, Burtec's situation was still fairly new. We had not fully embraced what that number would look like, and so, again, was set conservatively. In the current year, going forward, we have a better estimate what that number looks like annually, but that's primarily Burtec. The transient occupancy tax is the hotel tax, $700,000 of positive variance. That's been trending well for multiple years and continues to do well. The demand is good. It creates high occupancy rates. They can keep their average daily rates up for room rates, and that just plays well for us on our room tax, 10%. The next item is the other taxes. That's kind of a catch-all for some other things, but the primary item in there that had a variance from budget was the property transfer tax. That's not tied to value. So if property taxes are rising or falling, that doesn't affect the property transfer tax. It's the volume of activity that affects the property transfer tax. So you could have a high volume of activity when things are coming down or when they're going up, or you could have a lighter volume, just the opposite direction. So we, again, budget that one fairly conservatively, like we told you during the budget sessions, because you don't know how many properties are going to turn over year to year, and you don't want to guess high and then wind up being short. But the next item is the miscellaneous revenue line item. That had a single item in which I worked with community development, and we cleaned up some old deposit accounts they had for developers had paid money in that needed to reimburse the general fund for expenses it incurred, and so that exercise had not occurred in a number of years, turns out. So we did that, and that wound up being a one-time $500,000 windfall to the general fund. The transfers in, then, the item's $500,000 also. It relates to expenses the general fund has incurred that are bond funded. In 16-17, there was $500,000 of costs incurred relative to the mall property development process, and bond funds were drawn down in the subsequent fiscal year because it was a timing issue that the funds were drawn down in the next fiscal year for costs were incurred in the previous year, and so we had not accounted for it in the budget because it's a neutral transaction. The costs and the revenues are equal, and so as a result, that showed up as a revenue item in this fiscal year positively. And so that makes up the good news side of the fence. On the downside is the Measure Z sales tax was down about $1 million, which there is during the year there was a distribution center that had been assigning all of their sales in the western region to San Bernardino specific, and that was identified, and we were not sure how Board of Equalization would distribute or when they would redistribute the allocations to the other jurisdictions that are entitled to the funds, and that all happened in the fourth quarter of 2018 or 17-18 fiscal year in the spring. And so that was a $691,000 correction to that item, and that is the primary reason for that to be down. The other is that the Board of Equalization, or it's the Department of Tax and Fees now, they call it, that they implemented a new accounting system to improve our world, and as a result, they've not been able to distribute sales tax dollars, even though they've been paid to the Department of Taxes and Fees, and they have the cash in hand. They've not been able to remit it to agencies, so there's $300,000 also that we will get this year that was really related to last year. The general fund, or the sales tax, the regular sales tax, has a component of that too. It's just less material because of the size of that pot of funds. Down the utility users tax side, that's the revenue that's of a little more concern. There's lots of things that affect that. So when people are conserving water, or it's a cold, cooler summer, things like that, they just cause utility users to be down. People doing satellite versus cable, all the kinds of things that people might solar away from, regular utility costs. All those things are kind of common things happening in our world, and so it's just a revenue line item we need to pay attention to as we project going forward.
Councilman Nick.
Question?
Yeah, and I have been given some warning about the utility users tax, both in terms of its potential volatility, but also that we sort of rely on the utilities to account for this and remit this, right? What is the process of auditing that process, ensuring that, because my understanding is historically the city has had situations where we come to find out my understanding is we weren't getting all the revenue that we were supposed to, and then we trued up eventually on the utility users tax with certain utility operators. How do we ensure that we're getting our fair share of that revenue?
Historically, on the utility users tax, we have had a third-party vendor we've used look at that for us. I had a conversation with them this last year, and they have not. I only have a shorter window of history here, so if there's something further back that.
Because I think I would like to learn why it's decreased. Just to get a sense of what if this is a long-term trend that we're looking at, if this is a one-off, how reliable will this, as you had mentioned, there's changes that may be occurring that may make this a bit more volatile than perhaps it has been historically.
I think we need to prepare, and then Brent may have some additional comments. I think we need to look at all of our revenues and continue to diversify all of them, because that is one, as people become more energy conscious and water conscious, that tax is dependent on consumption.
What was the total projected amount of both Measure Z sales tax this year, and what was the total projected amount of the UUT this year?
About $8.5 million on Measure Z and about $25 million on utility users.
So that's a pretty significant chunk out of Measure Z.
Yes. Again, that's one time. That's not going to continue. So Measure Z should have literally landed spot on, just like sales tax did, but it had those two items I described. So if those had both happened properly, that wouldn't be on the list. It would be flat. So that
So we
one's less
expect to
concerning
get
me.
maybe, we'll true up this year on the Measure Z potentially
Well,
then?
the 300,000, we'll actually have a $300,000 windfall from the 17-18 receiving in 18-19, but the correction piece was the one-time reallocation. So I may have not described that well, but that the fix has already gone in place and has been in place for several quarters. It's the actual repayment component that was one-time in nature, and so that
the
will not
UUT
occur again.
Okay, and then the UUT, you said 25 million was the projected.
Correct.
We fell
About $1 million.
almost $1 million
Yeah.
short, so that's about a 4%.
And I think we should continue to plan that as people conserve, that is going to go down.
Okay. And just one last question on UUT. Is there any exemption for these large warehouses, these large utility consumers, as we're seeing more growth in that sector? Is that potentially going to affect the overall amount? So in other words, do they get discounts on their overall electricity consumption that may have some effect on that revenue source?
Well, when you raise the question of electricity, that's beyond us, so if they did, but at the same time, I don't believe they're really, they have to recover costs. So if Edison is giving them a break, that means they're taking it out of your pocket and my pocket to give that a break. And so they have some tools they can play with in that regard, but generally speaking, they still got to pay their way. And so that component, not much going on. From our own standpoint of discounts and things we can do, our code has some allowance for some kinds of
Exemptions.
ramping up of people that are new. If they're bringing, certain sales tax dollars, they're bringing certain jobs, that kind of thing, economic incentive types of things. But that just, it takes a little piece out, not a substantial piece, and that's out of new dollars, not of, so if you've been in business 25 years, unless you're doing something new to bring new bodies, new sales tax incentive, there's not an allowance for that then.
Okay.
And most of the new warehouses and large facilities are LEED certified, and so they're going to consume less than, an older building that has older systems in it. So, most of those are not huge consumers of.
Sort of like the gas tax, as it gets more efficient, your revenues start to decline.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But the point is, we do need to look at this one because all the things we talked about are trends pushing downward on this revenue. So they have rate increases each year generally, and so those help us in that regard, but they just, this extent have kind of flattened. And when we had our budget conversations, we talked about this being a challenged revenue going forward, and it is a big piece of our pie, and therefore we need to keep looking at it and monitoring it, and to the extent something goes, bigger away than it has now, that'd be more reason for concern.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, sir. So this is a lot of rearview mirror because you're just highlighting some of the really the challenges on some of those two last items. The good news is that we had a surplus.
Correct.
Right.
And so let's not kind of diminish the point here. Is we have a surplus, and my other concern is back to Councilman Nickel. Very, very astute, I think, line of reasoning here. So to expand a little bit upon Councilman Nickel, is the utility user rates, is it even constitutional for us to exact more tax out of a commercial business than it would a residential? Or is there a flat line rate on UUTs?
We are always doing everything that's constitutionally permissible.
So can we optimize and explore opportunities for the commerce utility rates within the confines of the law? Can we look at, since some of these newer developments are being LEED certified, a lot of homes are being LEED certified, is there maybe some provision, and that's for you, I mean, for you guys to kick around and punt, is there opportunity for our staff to look at, even in the development code or development impact fees, how do we pick up and garner more revenues with commercial utilization here on the UUT tax?
One of the items that we have on our list that we want to look at is whether or not that language needs to be modernized, because cities have gone through, so yeah, we have several.
So that's on your radar?
Yeah.
Thank you. And if you guys could really help us out on that, because you're right, Councilman Nickel, that this is probably going to head a little bit more south here. People are getting smart and using solar and all kinds of things. including stealing electricity and all other novel new thoughts, right? So if we could, that would be great.
Okay, we'll move on to the expense side. Less details to chat about here. Overall, the budget had a positive variance of $10.1 million. Much of that was salary savings from vacancies that we still struggle to get, the positions we funded, we want them filled to provide services and do the things that we all want done in the city. But at the same time, when there's a vacancy, it does, if it's been funded, it does flow out as a savings at the end of the year, and so I'm scooping that up now. But beyond the salary savings component, the general government department of the city, which is things that don't naturally fall to another department, had a substantial savings, $2.5 million. Those items were debt service, which has to do with the restructured pension bonds that had a particular repayment schedule when we put the budget together, when the bankruptcy was finalized. That had been modified a bit and kicked out a little bit, so we had less payments to make this year than otherwise planned. Lease rental, which has to do with the Arrowhead, 600 Arrowhead building that we were leasing space in earlier in this fiscal or last fiscal year, that we moved out of quickly. There was no air conditioning. That was kind of problematic. And so we consolidated here, and we saved $400,000 for that then. So that was a positive. Also, there's a line in that division, and there has been in that year there was for improvements around the Civic Center projects. It was part of the coming out of the bankruptcy, putting aside money each year. There was ultimately going to be debt service then, but for the meantime, until we got to the point of debt service on a new city hall or something, it funded the cost when we were moving between offices and so forth. But last year we didn't have costs for that generally. So those three things together made up the most of that $2.5 million of savings in general government. And then the last two savings are in our largest two departments. Police, about $2 million beyond the salary savings, and Public Works, about $1 million beyond salary savings. And each of those, the lion's share of the dollars were in internal service charges. That's departments like fleet services, IT costs, workers' comp, generally liability. So we don't expend all those funds, there's less charges flowing back to the departments then. And so as a result, they had some material savings in that regard. Police also had some professional services and equipment as well. After that, the last tally gets you to $10 million, were all the other departments together, and none of the ones were material to speak of. So that's just kind of highlighted that was, and then most of their savings was salary savings. We focused primarily on the general fund, but there are other operating funds as well, and we wanted to at least comment on those briefly. Those other funds, as listed here, gas tax, animal control, fleet services, information technology, general liability, Measure I, all of those are operating funds or have operations built into them, a budget adopted, and they all were operating within the allocated budgetary authority for the year. Workers' comp is spelled out separately as it was over budget, which sounds bad when you first say it out loud, but the reason for that is we put an amount in the budget specifically for settlements, and we had what I think you would consider a good year in terms of settlements. You approve those individually in closed session, and as the new third-party administrator and the attorney works with the workers' comp HR department to bring forward settlements that make sense, where you can save, $80,000 of liability for a $25,000 settlement amount, that kind of thing. And those are approved. The key question is, do we have the resources to fund those? And the answer is yes. There's enough money in the liability trust fund to be able to fund those settlements. The last comments I want to make on the fiscal update for last year is in regards to capital funds. This is outside of operating, but they're still part of the story. In the last several years, through bankruptcy particularly, as you know, capital funds have been expended very lightly. In the meantime, still, those capital funds have continued to receive their revenues, be it impact fees or Measure I dollars, that kind of thing. And so those have collected in their respective buckets, and those buckets collectively at June 30, 18, have a little over $40 million in them, which is a good chunk of change. Nowhere near enough money to do what we have done, but that's the dollar amount that's there. The report, the attachment has the detail of that in the reports you received in the agenda. But that money is being used now. CIP that was adopted as part of the budget process plans to invest $46 million this year. That'll be this year's dollars plus some touch of the funds on hand. And then over the 3 years, it currently calls for $88 million. And so those funds are getting used again now, as you see Public Works up here week in, week out, bringing projects forward to you. Next topic we're going to talk about is the 10-year financial plan. This had its birth as the 20-year financial model, as you recall, from the bankruptcy years. And really, with a 20-year model, years 11 through 20, apart from some special information, which doesn't really exist, are a lot like year 10, just multiplied out with a 2% factor of growth or something like that. So we've opted then to not really waste a lot of ink and paper on that and the micro print you see, and so make it a 10-year financial plan that we use now for our long-term financial planning. We internally have committed to update it quarterly, or as often as new information is available that's relevant to move the needle. You'll recall during the budget planning process, we spent a fair amount of time in one of those meetings going through that document then and trying to point out where we are and the reasons we were taking actions we were doing. At that point in time, the worst year, I think, was 21-22, and it had a roughly $7 million plan deficit, and that was driving a lot of the actions and suggestions that were being made to basically remedy that. And we had conversation about starting now versus waiting, because to wait till it hits, then you got to take a knee-jerk reaction, big draconian hits then. And so, and as you'll see as we talk through this, substantial progress has been made, and the efforts that have been done are paying off, but there's still work to do. So we'll get there. Then I'm getting ahead of myself. So you saw the model at the budget process that had the $7 million worst-case deficit, the peak of the deficit, if you will. But the fiscal year ended positively, as well as the adopted budget had a surplus. And instead of just a balanced budget, we continued to scrape together a surplus of about $800,000. Also, the PERS results for the next fiscal year have been published, and they were positive results this time, which we're used to hearing PERS on the bad side of the fence, but this time the results were good. Next time they could swing the other way. There's so many variables in that analysis that it's you can't get too excited about it, but you'd rather have it good than bad. But just as it's good this year, something could happen in the market, and next year it's the other direction. So it's a dynamic, not static plan, and we know that, and that's why we're committed to updating it as often as is relevant. And then also the organizational changes to the city attorney's office also call for, have made some fiscal impacts significant, and those are built into the model that you have in your packet as well now as attachment 2.
I want to comment that when we're making financial decisions, it's critical that we stick to this idea of running what those are through the financial model, so we see if we hadn't been looking at 2021 on the surface, the annual budget was balanced. I mean, tight but balanced. It isn't until you look at it from a 10-year and even a 20-year perspective that you realize that budget deficit begins to grow. And under that initial scenario, as we prepared the budget for your consideration initially, in about 21, 22, we would have had close to a $7 million deficit. We encouraged you to take swift action then and be decisive, because that really changed that. And so Brent's going to walk through, we've been able to make significant progress. But again, it's because you continue to that path of trying to become much more efficient, making sure that the allocation of the dollars that we do have are aligned with what the goals and objectives are. And so we've been able to change that from a almost $7 million deficit to about 3.8. And so we know we still have work to do, but we've made significant progress because we did it early.
Councilman Nickel?
Yeah, there was one more question I had on the revenue. I apologize. But on the TOT tax specifically, are we at an optimal TOT right now, in your opinion?
We kicked that around a little bit in the budget sessions, and they probably could go up, especially with the demand that seems to be there that's natural, that we probably wouldn't. The question is, it takes a vote to do that and change it.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to anticipate 21, 22. Yeah. We probably want to start thinking about this stuff now.
One of the things that we plan to do, certainly tonight we wanted to present this to you because we have some 17, 18 numbers.
I wasn't sure if that the windfall that we have in TOT. How much did we get extra in TOT?
700,000.
700, I wasn't that much, okay. But if that accounted for an increase, or what's
remains-
behind that number?
Just usage, but it did not envision any kind of an increase that the council may want to contemplate at some point.
So
in the
that was
future.
just more rooms being
Yeah.
sold.
Mhm.
There you go. I mean, if
Or
that was
rates being
just,
at a higher-
if that was simply driven by demand, I think we got a real opportunity here. Okay, all
So
right, thanks.
In early next year, we plan to bring back to you a couple things. One is Measure Z, because obviously that's sunsetting, and I think we need to have those discussions earlier than later, and a process for how we want to address that, but also look at TOT and some of the other revenue opportunities that we think may be there for the council's consideration and direction. And TOT is certainly one of those. We think there may be some opportunities.
Walking through the actual changes then to the plan, as I mentioned a minute ago, the adopted budget was $800,000 of a surplus, and so we ran that through the model, that from the $7 million deficit you saw originally. Of course, that takes off about $800,000 a year. The city attorney's office structural changes beyond what was included in the adopted budget are $900,000 once all the transition costs have been played through. So on your slide, or attachment 3, it basically demonstrates how those costs run out, but we've run that through the model as well. I mentioned the PERS savings make up the difference then, but also the opening balance number increased by the $8 million. And so you raised where you started the conversation at, as you're trying to hold on to the reserves through those times. And as Andrew was just saying, while these are all great things, there's still work to do. There's still $3.8 million. That's it's better than 7, but it's not done by a long shot then. So the model we intend to use, it's very, I say easy because I don't have to do it myself, but it's not a complicated tool to use to, when we want to propose a change of this or that, we can run it through and see what it looks like and then give you new impact numbers for it. So that's a resource we want to be able to do as often as needed.
And I just want to clarify about the city attorney's office. There are transition costs that we had to bear this year as they transitioned into our organization. We did have people that separated from service, and so there were costs, related to the payout of their accrued leave and things of that nature. And we didn't just immediately eliminate all those positions. In fact, we were able to find positions for people within the organization, and we still do have 3 positions that are supporting that office, the elected city attorney, and then 2 other positions from the existing staff. So again, we think that number can go up as high as $1.5 million, maybe even a little bit higher, because Sonia and her team have done an excellent job. They review every single bill with a fine-tooth comb, and I think some attorneys, outside attorneys, have been surprised to have them call about the rates that they're charging that were not approved in their agreements, but they have them in other cities, and so they just roll that rate over to every bill that they do, and Sonia and her staff have caught that. Double billing for things, billing on things that they don't really need to be directly involved in. So again, we think that number can become even lower, especially on the special counsel side. This year, about $900,000. We think in future years, more like $1.5 million, and that still may even be conservative. As for special litigation, so we would bring all that to you, but again, you approve budgets based on that.
Councilman Nichol?
Yeah, I hate to dwell on this TOT, but I'm looking at page 585. I get a lot of comments on TOT. There's a lot of people that have some, I think, some pretty reasonable ideas about what we can do on TOT. But I'm looking at the revenues. Is TOT rolled up into the sales and use taxes? Where does it lie in that?
It's a separate line. It has a separate line.
Where is it? I don't see it here. On page 585. I'm looking at the revenues of the 10-year. So page 585, projected budget. Yeah.
The 10. Oh, okay, sure.
He's looking at the 10-year.
Yeah, the 10-year, because that's what the subject we're on right now.
Gotcha, sorry.
Yeah. Where does it exist in this? under the revenues.
Other taxes,
On other taxes,
yeah.
where's other taxes here?
First line?
Oh, very top line. Is that exclusively TOT, or what's in that number?
COT is about $5 million.
Yeah, I think I'd like to start seeing the TOT called out if
Yeah,
we can.
I agree. That makes good sense.
Yeah, let's call it out the next time we do this, so we can watch that number. I think that's a number we can optimize. All right, thanks.
Okay, we'll move on. We're headed into the city attorneys as the third subject now for the evening. I'll try not to retread ground that Andrea shared here.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's good. It's saying the same things here. So, we adopted the budget for the city attorney's office with 14 FTEs funded, which was a reduction of 5 from the prior year. So there were savings initially captured of about $500,000. And then it also included budget for a traditional funding organizational structure. But as you well know, subsequent to adoption, BB&K was selected to deliver the municipal services for the city. Certainly a cost-efficient decision. We made a commitment to you to come back and present this information here of once we had things kind of combed through. And that's an ongoing process as well, by the way. But what does it look like generally at this point in time? And we shared the savings we talked about of about, well, the next slide has that on it, but I'll go there. The savings are about $954,000 this year, but as you roll out the transition costs that will phase out, that number is 1.4, 1.5, maybe try to be conservative here, but there's good news to be had in that regard in subsequent years as well, which is built into the 10-year plan that we were just talking about then. And then lastly, also, we were able to, by virtue of freeing up several of those offices, consolidate some staffing in the Vanner Tower building, and this year saving $130,000. That number will be a little higher next year for a full 12 months. That was a 8-month number, I believe. So another 50% of that number. Anything else I want to say on that slide? She mentioned only 3 staff remaining. Consolidation offices, B&K. Yes, that's it. We got it all. Okay, so that's the update. Just the key is to make sure it's $950,000 savings this year, rolling out to about $1.5 million by the time all the transition costs are phased out then. The fourth section, and this is one of the bigger sections I wanted to chat about, this even longer sections, is that we've been talking about general fund reserve policy for much of this year, maybe more than this year even probably, that every time we talk about reserves, we always land on, we really want a policy to do something with that then, and figure out, is 31 million, is 39 million, what's the right number for reserves? And again, that's going to be much more art than science to get it right, because any number, you could spend all of it on the needs of the city, I'm sure. But generally the $39 million we have now, we'll talk through this and we'll have a proposed for you of how we think that might look and at a good starting place. The policy is obviously always subject to change. If it's not working once we get it rolling, you can amend it next month. You can amend it 3 months. You can amend next meeting if you want, type of thing. But the idea is to get something going, give us some structure and some way to begin evaluating our level of reserves. We've had strong revenues, and as I mentioned before, we've had heavy levels of vacancies, and so the savings on expenditures and strong revenues have, over the last several years, have helped build us back to this $39 million number. Best practices certainly would indicate that we ought to be having a reserve policy to guide the use of these funds, the accumulation of these funds, but also once you have used them potentially consistent with the policy, the replenishment of the funds too then. So it's not just a use and then move on and see what happens. It's all part of a strategic, thoughtful process to manage our reserves as a city. And this proposed policy does all those things. It also gives the flexibility to the mayor and the council to revisit annually or as often as you'd like, really to make other decisions if appropriate. The proposed policy allocates the $39 million that we've talked about over an operating reserve and special reserves. The terminology is fairly consistent with the industry, but there's nothing magical about these words. They're terms of art that have to be understood in the context of the policy. The operating reserve is recommended to be at 25% with two components, an emergency reserve, and we'll talk about these individually in a second, and then an economic contingency reserve of 10%. So together, 25%, but with different nuances as to how each of those pieces would be used. And then special reserves, we've created 4 buckets, or proposing 4 buckets, and there's nothing magical about those, but they're the kinds of things we've talked about needing dollars for, and so we've proposed 4. You could add one next year when you think something else you want to be earmarking money for specifically, or if 2 of these are too similar, you can condense them. There's no magic to that. It's just ideas getting into an exercise of beginning to think about these things to put money aside. And I mentioned through the budget process, as often as you'd like, but also the mid-year report and the year-end report are natural times to discuss the reserve levels and see if any appropriate adjustments are called for.
Councilman Nickel.
Can you go back to that previous slide quickly? Okay, so the 39 million, so you're saying that 25% of that 39 million needs to be in the operating reserve?
Sorry, not clear then. And I'll get into that more in the next slide, but 25% is 25% of general fund expenditures.
So all of our expenditures. So that would be 125, what are we at this year?
126 million.
126 million, so 25% of that would be.
18.9, or 31.5 is 25%,
31.5.
but the components are 18.9 and 12.6.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, we'll start with the emergency reserve, which is the larger of the 2 operating reserve components. It's designed to address unusual and frequent occurrences, so the natural disaster, the earthquake when City Hall falls down, that's the classic example or whatever, which is not going to happen, I'm sure. But it also referred to as the rainy day fund, that kind of thing. And the hope would be that you'd never, ever have to touch that at all. It just sits there and does its thing, earns some interest, and we just enjoy life doing all the other things. But it's to be there as a backstop against the more dramatic emergency then. It's set at 15%, which is roughly 2 months operating expenditures. There's no magic to that number either. It could be higher, it could be lower. The national organization that does this kind of thing sets this kind of policy, GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. It's what that organization is. It's our financial national organization that does a lot of think tank stuff on these kinds of issues. They recommend 2 months of expenditures as a baseline. Now,
With other, well, and I just want to clarify, they recommend that, though they also encourage that you have other types of reserves so that you are dealing with capital improvements, reinvestment in your community, so that you have other types of reserves. Assuming you have other types of reserves, then 2 months is what they recommend. We right now have nothing. We have just one big pot of money. So they would recommend 2 months in that emergency reserve with some other funds, identifying those things that you know are going to be coming up that you're going to need to save money for.
Yeah, so it's only a guideline, and they tell it, and they write in their words, they say every organization needs to look at their own situation and make their own determination of what they think is best for them. And so we've done that, and we believe that because we have a healthy number of other reserves, a number of other reserves, particularly the next one, the economic contingency, and then some of the special reserves as well, that together, if the unthinkable happened, all of that's available. And so we have really more than that, but for that particular component, there was no reason to put, in our minds, to put more than that into the emergency reserve, which is theoretically not to be touched then.
But I would recommend that if you choose not to do the other ones, that we consider increasing that, because 3 months in terms of cash flow, or 2 months, excuse me, in terms of cash flow is not very long, especially when you think about how our revenues come in. So again, if you think about not including the other reserves, then I would suggest you consider increasing that to 20 or higher.
Councilman Nickel.
Yeah, because I think I was looking at some of what the other surrounding cities have. So looking at, I think Riverside is 120 days that they have in their policy.
A lot of city managers do prefer.
Yeah, so a quarter plus of reserves.
They adopted a 15. They had a target of trying to move to 20%.
Really?
As a goal to move there, yeah.
Okay, because I read through their policy and it said their target's 120 days.
I looked at their policy, and so, I mean,
Okay.
there could be some of the discussion, they have, I
Okay.
don't know, but it's a.
Okay, I just want to understand. 2 months just doesn't sound a lot.
And
Yeah,
again,
it doesn't
if you
sound
only
like.
want to do that one, I suggest we increase that.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, sir. The second bullet point, the GFOA, what is the League of California Cities? I know they also have some recommendations, and do those, what are they, and are they consistent with GFOA, or which one is more liberal, or?
Well, the league tries to stay pretty consistent with GFOA.
So they're in keeping, so this would be in keeping, 15%. And that's of expenditures.
Operating expenditures. And again, just with the caveat that all of them say you may need more or less depending on your circumstances and the way your cash flow is. And usually they encourage that not only do you have that fund, but that you have several other funds for other types of contingencies.
I'm in full, I get it, and I appreciate this. This is great work. We have been for a long time contemplating what to do with the surplus, so I'm glad we're having this conversation. My hope is that we can ultimately adopt something tonight on a reserve policy, and I think we're headed in the right direction. This is great. Appreciate all the hard work from staff.
Okay, continue. Again, only a guideline. The idea is that the utilization of this emergency reserve, because it's truly an emergency reserve, would require a declaration of an emergency by the City Council. So it makes it a little more stringent to be able to access it. Staff will be required then to submit a plan back to the council once the emergency has passed, or whatever point in time is appropriate, you've kind of gotten through the storm, to bring the plan forward to address the replenishment of that reserve then. You know, if we had to take it down to 5% because of whatever was going on, how do we get the other 10 percentage points back again then? And so that would be a requirement per policy of staff to bring that back to you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, at this point in time, with this proposed policy, the balance at June 30, 2018 would be $18.9 million. The second piece of the operating reserve, again, which is all to be considered together still, really, but that component that's the untouchable was the 15%. The other piece is 10%, that's designed to be a little more usable, if you will. It's designed to enable the city to strategically manage through the economic downturns. The idea is that as opposed to having to knee-jerk reaction and cut off expenditures immediately that year, that if the council so chose, they could manage themselves into the recession downturn and then not have to make so dramatic cuts to services and people and so forth if they wanted to, as part of a plan. And then when that downturn is through, stabilized, I guess, the same thing would be required again, that staff would be bringing forward a plan to return that, but within 5 years specifically. So, in other words, if you didn't think you'd get there, you shouldn't be using it in the front end. You need to make bigger cuts to the front end if you can't get back there in 5 years.
And I just want to make a point about this one. If we had had this type of a reserve, either one of these, we would not have had to file for bankruptcy. But the fact of the matter is, we had, for many, many years prior to that, we had spent down our reserves, so we had nothing, and really we ran out of money. We physically just ran out of money, so we had nothing to draw upon. So that's why these are so critical. And then we were in the position where we were having to cut things that really were not palatable, and make some tough decisions with not a lot of time to really research and analyze and think thoughtfully about them, because we did not have ourselves in a position where we had the time to react strategically. So this is why we're recommending both of these. That way, if we find ourselves in a situation again, we have the ability to be strategic about what we do to move ourselves through that.
And this reserve, again, designed to manage through, but it's still it's just a little less severe of an emergency than the building falling down. And we expect economic downturns, so we would expect at some point in time probably to do this, to use these funds, but thoughtfully, so that you return them back at the end of the story, and then you wait to need them again, kind of thing. It's just savings in the bank for those months that are or don't work out on a personal finance side of the fence. And then to get 10% of general fund expenditures, which was a good comment. It should have been spelled out. It says that in the policy. It says that specifically. I just neglected to put that in the report. But at 10%, it would be $12.6 million then. So together, you're talking $31.5 million, which is, again, a full quarter of the budget that way. So I guess 3 months of expenses. the general fund policy, operating reserve can go as high as 30%, per the policy. Idea is that, you don't have to cut it off at 25, you can't go higher. But given we're not in the business of amassing funds, we're in the business of receiving resources and putting them to good use for the community. The idea of having a ceiling on that then, so 30 is 30. Again, there's nothing magical with that number. It's could go higher if you thought. That's another way you could get at the if you wanted a higher number, you could simply have a higher ceiling than 30%. But that's a policy discussion to have if you want to increase that higher. But again, if exceeded. Staff would be required then to bring forward to the council a plan to spend those funds. They'd be considered one-time kinds of revenues, resources, so you'd want to put those to one-time types of uses, examples of which are listed, accelerating funding of special reserves. You could repay debt early, special projects that were not scheduled for this year, you could accelerate timing on. Really anything one-time, so you're matching one-time revenues with one-time expenses and not hiring more officers with that money that's going to have an impact in subsequent years to, that isn't funded then. So, okay. Then on to the special reserves. We have 4 buckets, as I mentioned. These are really established just to create an opportunity to think strategically about putting resources away for the city's needs. And the buckets simply mirror the individual needs. The risk management is designed to address the liabilities the city has. For right now also, I'm thinking about it from the bankruptcy settlement costs. We still have some costs we're still incurring for those, and so there's some money for that, possibly. The city facilities reserve would fund costs replacing city buildings and parks, vehicles and equipment, surprise, funding for vehicles and equipment, and infrastructure also for infrastructure. But one of the thoughts there too was that we can pursue grants on infrastructure or for lots of things, but most of our grants fall into the infrastructure category, and that some grants need a local match. And therefore, we either struggle to find that or have to pull out of other resources, et cetera. But if we had some money tucked away in here, when Trish brings forward that perfect grant that we can't live without for $12 billion or whatever it is, and has a $100 million match. No, it's just whatever it is. But the idea is that that's another use of those funds also. But it could be for any of those reserves for that matter. If it was a grant for vehicles, you could do that as well. But that was primarily the thought on the infrastructure then.
And just to talk about how important that is, there are an awful lot of grants that don't come necessarily right at budget time. So we don't know about them at the time of the budget. So we don't have the opportunity to budget for the match component. This would give us a reserve to go to so that we now have an adopted budget. We find this grant opportunity. We could come to you and say this is one because we think it has such tremendous value to the community. It requires a local match of X. We would recommend that you take it from the infrastructure reserve if that grant is for infrastructure replacement without, again, affecting the other priorities that you've already established through the budget process.
Okay. Again, the idea of the special reserves is to address long-term funding. Really, 30-year outlook is what we're looking at to try and figure out what kind of annual funding should we be putting aside for equipment and vehicles. Obviously not 30 years. Some of our vehicles maybe have been 30 years, but we're dealing with that. And so that'd be more of a 5, 10, 15-year, depending on the nature of the equipment. But an analysis should be done to look at the listing of equipment we have. What, this should take 5 years to replace it, and there's $1 associated with that. So you can do that work, and the analyses are being done on much of our infrastructure, facilities, and so forth. And so ultimately that can play into a projected annual cost that we ought to be putting aside. In some years you spend that, other years you put it away, you don't spend it all, other years you spend that and the prior years because that's the big spending year. So anyway, it's more thoughtful financial planning of taking care of our assets. I mentioned again the budget process is that there's a chance each year for the City Council and the Mayor to review these, consider these, figure out what we should put aside if that year, if that's appropriate, if resources exist. Question?
Councilman Nickel.
So have we modeled what the proposed reserve policy, what effect that's going to have on our 10-year plan? Is that modeled anywhere in here?
Well, it is in that we know that we have $39 million, and really what we're suggesting here is that you allocate that to these special reserve accounts.
Okay, because we know we're going to be in deficits. And
correct, yes.
So actually, we're going to be in deficits starting according to this, we're going to be in deficits in a couple of years.
Well,
Yes.
next year starts the deficit right
Yeah,
now.
the-
Part- We won't
the
let that happen, I'm
deficit
sure, but
starts
that's.
next year.
And again, this, assuming this all worked out exactly that way, you would have the opportunity then to draw upon your reserves if we had to. And again, my goal would be that we correct that as we continue to make good decisions. But if we had to, that would give you a chance to draw on those reserves. It would require an action of the council. And at the budget time, we would say to you, based on all the expenses that we're anticipating this year, we recommend that you draw from your reserves in the amount of $2.4 million.
And
Again,
we'll be drawing on reserves. Essentially, we'll be taking action,
Yes.
from what I see, until about 2026.
absolutely. And that's why.
Every year, we'll be making an emergency
Dwindling.
motion that we're in a deficit or we're in an emergency situation that needs to draw on that.
Exactly. And our plan is not to have you have to do that, but that's why we do this.
Mhm.
So that as we're making decisions and recommendations, we can say, remember, it's going to affect the 10-year model. And you will start seeing now, every time we recommend increases in expenses, especially on the personnel side, because they have huge impacts to us long-term, we're going to run it through the model for you so you see what that does. So you think about what does that do then in terms of your reserve policy.
Yeah, well, I can see the headlines every year. It's going to be city has to declare another fiscal emergency for
But it's not
10
going
years.
to be because you have a chance now to correct it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, I get it. I just,
Boy, Henry, right before Thanksgiving,
I know.
bringing us all down.
I know.
No, Henry, you have
I'm
a
just-
chance to
I'm just-
correct it.
Every decision has a consequence, so I just want to make sure whatever policy we put in place is
Right.
going to be, because I don't want to
agree.
create fear among the community or the
That's
investor that, because we've adopted this policy now, we have to go through this formal
No.
process every year of declaring a fiscal emergency to draw on.
Well, and it would not be a fiscal emergency for the economic reserve. The emergency reserve, yes, but it's just a
Right.
majority of the council approving. So it's basically all you're doing is choosing to tap
Right.
into fund balance with doing this, which is what
Right.
you would do naturally
Oh, I
anyway now.
understand
So
that.
it's really not anything that
Yeah.
extreme for that
And
use of the funds.
And it is not like when you had to declare that for bankruptcy.
Oh, I understand. I understand. Okay, all right, thanks.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish your
Okay.
presentation.
The last slide on the policy here is just laying out for the special reserves what we have. So after the 31.5 is pulled out of the 39, that leaves us 7.5. The council's already acted on carryovers this summer for $1.5 million to the general fund. So that's already set aside, if you will, outside of all this. And then we're recommending $2 million be set aside to the risk management reserve for handling ongoing bankruptcy and administrative settlement costs that still exist. We have some obligations still to make in that. And then also the remaining $4 million be put aside in the city facilities reserve to address capital improvement plan decisions that were made this year that affect the general fund.
And the reason why we suggested those two, we realized beyond the bankruptcy, we had a lot of cases that just backed up that weren't even necessarily in bankruptcy, but we're trying to get through. We're looking forward to a day when we don't have so much old stuff to deal with, and we're really looking forward. So we realize that we have quite a few things that we have yet to address. That's why we recommended $2 million to those reserve accounts, and then $4 million to city facilities reserve, because in addition to the significant decline in the streets and the public infrastructure, we also have city facilities that need to be able, and I think about your Delman Heights Park and others throughout the community, where we need to begin reinvesting in our facilities so that we are able to provide high-quality services. So we think given the state of the city's infrastructure and facilities, we need to dedicate additional money toward that.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does, sir.
All right, so in the 10-year model, the PERS discount rate, what has been the rate that you've included in this?
The numbers PERS had provided to us, so I'm not putting a number in there. The PERS is giving us 7 years of projections, and then we're just taking the last increase in years 6 to 7 and continuing that out. So
what is
they are
that?
taking it to 7% right now.
What is the discount rate that they've
It's
used currently?
It's headed to 7%. It's at
It's what?
7%.
It's 7%?
Yes. That's the long-term piece. It's
Went from what?
7.5 to 7.
7.5 to 7?
Step down over 3 years.
And that's incorporated in this?
Mm-hmm.
So is it anticipated to stay at 7 or to go below 7?
That's a policy question that the PERS board has yet to address. Right now, it's impacted to it's staying at 7. Although what we're doing also, we're having John Bartel. We're contracting with, you've heard of John Bartel before. He's the kind of statewide expert on, if you're not PERS, it's John Bartel talking. And so we literally are in the middle of contracting, spending a few dollars with him to give us kind of a longer-term look even, because in this amortization curve associated with paying down the unfunded liability, there is a point, like with your mortgage, it feels like it's forever, but there is a point when it comes back down, and those dollars free up again. And that's like, you've burst through the end zone, or you score a touchdown, or you finish the race, and it's going to feel great because it's gone so high that when that comes down, there's going to be it's past my tenure, but it's a pot of funds that's going to be available for doing a lot of good for the city at that point in time. But that's 20 plus years out, so unfortunately.
22, I think they're estimating. And the other reason why we're engaging Bartel to do that, and Bartel works statewide, very, very well known. Our situation is slightly different. And they use some assumptions, for all government agencies. We realize, bankruptcy, we lost a lot of employees during that time period. We have changed the complexion of our organization dramatically, so we want to see how those unique impacts in San Bernardino affect our PERS rates going forward, so we have a longer horizon than 7 years. So that's why we think it's critical to have that additional analysis.
So currently, the report assessment is that the city's financial condition is better than it's probably been in a couple of decades.
Yes.
But the caution is that this analysis, although it helps in that decision-making process, needs to be effectively reviewed from a cautionary standpoint, because there are some unknowns that are likely to appear.
Yes.
One of the knowns, though, is that we have equipment replacement needs. And so there isn't in here a capital replacement fund, so that because you're replacing equipment that we had on the books for 20-some years. We're purchasing 6 vehicles from Fairview Ford. Those vehicles actually should have probably been replaced years ago. And so there is a need to do.
We were finally able to get Nick to give us a good price.
There is an ongoing need to make sure that the assessment of the equipment, because this doesn't really account for that.
Well, there are lots of things.
We've made some of those purchases using their capital improvement plan that have been adopted, but there's still an ongoing need to make sure that the what's referred to as a state of good repair, the city's not there yet.
No.
We're not in a state of good repair. And so this really is kind of a minimum.
Yes.
The council needs to continue to make sure that that assessment is ongoing.
That's correct.
Trish has done a good job of trying to do that with the pavement index, to be able to help to plan the work that's being done. But it needs to extend to the equipment and the buildings, which you started to do. You did that and provided that the city actually has about a $9 million shortfall every year. And so
currently we have about a 7-year forecast of kind of what phases we'd want to replace the upcoming equipment to ultimately convert out the whole fleet. So we have that plan laid out. And there's reserve helps absolutely to be able to plan it better, but we kind of also look at how do we feed that evenly into the capital until we get there. Yeah.
And so I bring that up just to provide a cautionary note. $39 million is a healthy reserve currently, but it's not likely to be able to carry us into the future to improve us to get to that level of service that the city needs to return to.
Remember, during the budget process, we did some analysis, and our current backlog of deferred maintenance is about $183 million. And so, we have a huge And that didn't just happen overnight. That was many, many years. But we have a huge backlog of deferred maintenance. There are some other things, though, that we keep an eye on because we've got issues related to the stormwater runoff issues. We will be renegotiating our stormwater permits. That will increase costs. You look at the cities in Los Angeles County and what they've had to deal with. It's millions and millions of dollars that they didn't have budgeted that they are now responsible for, catch basins and a whole host of other things. So again, we're trying to stay on top of those things, get as many of those things implemented as possible because we realize there are all sorts of other regulations and things that change this. That's why we look at it regularly.
Thank you. Thank you, Brent. Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, sir. Brent, I really just appreciate your very good work. And I thank you for all what you've done for our community, and certainly appreciate it. I do have a couple of questions. The $1.5 million that you suggest were carried over, do we have a detailed, where is that 1.5 million? Because it's pretty cryptic as to, well, it's just carried over and we took council action. Where is that 1.5?
I don't remember the specific date, but we brought you two carryovers lists. One was purchase orders that were active from the 17-18 year that weren't done yet, had to come over into the 18-19 year, and that detail's not here. I'm sorry, I just referred to it because it was already approved. The other was funds that were not yet to the point of even issuing a purchase order, but had projects associated with them that we're going to continue on. Most of that was grant money.
We really shouldn't even book that as reserves then, because if those are programmed to be expended in this fiscal year, then we're going to utilize those.
For an accounting rule, which here, the riveting part of this, is that it's a reserve at 6/30/18 still, but it's spoken for, which is why I didn't include it in one of the other special reserve buckets then, because it's already
And
out.
so this $1.5 million is going to be expended in this fiscal year from carryover from previous.
Yes.
And those carryover amounts of $1.5 million are to be expended on what? Are you supposing that maybe Trish Ray or the city manager could help us? Are they actual public work projects? Are they special vehicle purchases?
They're a combination of all sorts of things that you approved during the budget process, but because of the way the workflow occurred, we weren't able to actually expend them. So you approved them as part of the budget process, but then as a double, and didn't get done. So they were things, and they would have resulted in a difference between your revenues and your expenses during that year. So you approved them, and then we brought them back.
Can you just maybe provide a list of
Yeah, we can
where's
send-
the money going to go? With
Right,
the
and we will
1.5?
send that to you
Okay.
again. But just as a caution, just so, again, for complete transparency, so you approve them in the budget process, and then we did bring to you another agenda item a few months ago where we showed those to you again and said, these are the ones we didn't get to, but we want authority to carry them over, and so council provided that authority, and we'll send
So
you
as
that.
to not interrupt the flow of the project or plan and design and build and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll send that
All right.
staff report to you again so you can see what you previously approved.
Does Urban Futures still consult or provide any consulting work on the finance department?
Very little now.
Not in quite a while.
Okay. And so there is no some.
Oh, and I'm sorry. There's one thing they do. It is. Sorry, I panicked. I did. There's something called continued disclosure associated with our debt. So there's different things we have to file with this agency, that agency, and so forth. They have been the person for eons that do that work. Most of our debt is redevelopment related, but we have one or two general fund related bond issues that are city transactions. So they do that. It's called continued disclosure work. It's required by the National Debt Reporting Agencies and so forth. The California Debt Investment Advisory Committee has requirements. So they do that work for us annually, and that's not related to bankruptcy at all in any way, but they have the expertise to do that kind of filing for us.
And it's a few hours.
The
Some of
RDA
it's-
portion is, yes.
Some of it is, yeah. And it's a few hours.
Yeah, it's once a year, maybe you touch it twice a year for special work. That's the next extent of what they're doing for us now.
And part of the reason for having them do that is because to have someone else do it, they would have to get up to speed and understand all those numbers to be able to do the continuing disclosure.
Okay, moving on to the recommendations on the reserve fund. I do have some questions. The you suggest. Oh, I just lost my place here. You suggest there's 4 categories or subdivision. Oh, there we are. Back at page 574. risk management reserve, city facilities, vehicle and equipment reserve, and infrastructure reserve in the special reserves bucket. But you're only recommending 2 of the 4. Do we have latitude to reappropriate the $6 million here in the 2 of the 4 buckets that you want into the vehicle and equipment and infrastructure? And if yes, then would that be a council direction or a policy direction? And the second follow-up question is there a borrowing allowed of sorts in this, within this $7.5 million?
Absolutely, you have full discretion to do whichever you'd like. It's a council decision. This is simply a staff recommendation based on the reasons that we provided. In terms of borrowing, you wouldn't need to do that per se because you have the discretion. If it's in reserve bucket D and you need it in bucket B, you just move it from D to B. There's not hard walls around that. It's a strategy for funding long term, but if the need is in bucket B, be it the city facilities right now and less than infrastructure, hard to imagine, but if that was what your decision was, then you could take it out of D and put it to B.
So at the time, so how that would physically happen, so at the time you wanted to do a project that was, maybe you wanted to buy extra vehicles, and we said, well, we didn't really budget for that, but you do have some funds in another reserve, we would bring that to you, and then you would authorize us to move those reserves and then use them for that other purpose.
So am I seeing this allocation only 2 of the 4 categories within special reserves are being funded? Is that right?
Today, because that's the
Today.
extent of the
And that's
reserves
your
we have.
recommendation?
Yes.
So absent we technically wouldn't have a infrastructure reserve or a vehicle equipment reserve
Right, we would
balance.
have them, we just wouldn't have any money, yeah.
Correct.
Correct, yes.
So
This
they're-
essentially just creates the mechanism.
So they're named and they're there, but with $0.
And we would hope that as we end fiscal years to the good, like we did this year, then we would say, gosh, council, where would you want to put these additional dollars? And we would begin to recommend, because we have such dramatic needs in those areas, we would probably recommend that you begin to fund those.
And the city facilities reserve, what made you come to that conclusion of $4 million? Why can't we fund the other 2 reserves? Because we
Again,
have money.
You can, certainly. But the CIP has general fund projects approved. And it needs funding, and this would be potentially part of that funding for the dollars. It's a vehicle. But if there's other needs that are pressing ahead of that, they can go that way then.
My other question is risk management reserve. Ms. City Manager, you talked about this is probably a pretty big figure. What is normal? What's typical? Because $2 million seems abnormal, and I understand the importance of addressing some of those outstanding issues
Right.
that we need to settle. But what is typical? What's normal?
Typically, it's significantly higher than this, because remember, we are a multi-million-dollar organization with multi-million-dollar.
It's higher than $2
liabilities.
million?
Yes, significantly, yes, significantly higher.
What is currently budgeted for risk
I
management?
think we have about $6 million in combined.
Yeah, but the actual settlements liability piece is just in the neighborhood of $1 million, I think.
No, I know, but what do you have combined in the balances, like $6 million between the 2 reserves?
No, it's less than that. It's
It's
less than 4.
That is significantly low.
And that's our general operating budget. We have about a $4 million budget for risk management.
And it's not so much a budget, but it's a reserve, and so then as you approve settlements, we draw upon the reserve. And this is maybe the best context for you. You can open up any local paper, regional paper, look at the settlements that are being levied against law enforcement agencies. There was one the other day, a $3 million case verdict. So, and again, we've got our POA here, and I appreciate what they do, but we need to understand, we are a big city with big city issues, and we have some obligations, and we do things.
Yeah, no. And all the more reason, and I'm supportive, I'm not going to somehow make some recommendation. But this is all the more reason why we need to really, in closed session, and it's as much as I'll say, contemplate our risks out there. And I'm so glad that we have capable attorneys advising us on some of the risks associated with, a moving truck, and everything in
It's
our
everything we do.
operation
Yes.
is a risk.
Yes, everything.
And so I'm just, but this is $2 million on top of what we've already
Yes.
projected for the fiscal year.
And I think going to our capable legal counsel, just to give them really some kudos, but also I think it will give you a comfort level. I think given our current status, we have a much better ability to analyze our risk, and it really is all, I mean, it is moving vehicles, cost a lot of money depending on what happens, the crosswalks we have, everything. And so I feel confident that going forward, we're going to have a much better ability to tell you what our potential exposure is, even down to as claims are filed against the city. One of the things that we've not done previously and we are going to start doing is give you a risk assessment. So when we get a claim, especially those very large ones, attorneys that do litigation work have the ability to kind of estimate what is the potential exposure in that matter, and you need to be exposed to that. We need to tell you what that is, because that should then go into your thought process about the strategy and dealing with that. So again, I think moving forward, you're going to have a much better understanding of where those areas of exposure are.
Thank you.
Councilman Nickel.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that we operationalize this reserve policy in the context of our 10-year plan.
Yes.
Because when I'm looking at this, we're in trouble in a couple years.
Yes. Oh, no.
And I think we need to have the discipline of a council, because I'm just looking at packet page 591, very last paragraph going on to page 592. It says, if an action of the city council for a reason other than those described above reduces the general fund operating reserve balance below 25% level required by this policy, staff must include an allocation to reserves in the following budget cycle sufficient to restore the reserve balance to 25% minimum balance required by this policy. The way we're going right now, we're going to be in a serious budget crunch in a couple years. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a city council not to get to that point where we're a year out and we're in that crunch. We need to start seeing that crunch well in advance, anticipating that crunch before it happens, because this is pretty draconian. This is going to require us to slash city services significantly in the very near future, but for us increasing our revenues and becoming more efficient and cost-effective operations. So this is by no means a windfall. This is by all means a call to caution and a call to being very thoughtful about everything we do, and very thoughtful about not just next fiscal year, but 2, 3, 4 fiscal years ahead. So I support it. I think it's good. I think it's going to bring some discipline to our budget process and give us more of a long view. But just, we'll be looking to staff to really be helping us understand how do we ride these waves and make sure that we get through them without significantly having to drastically cut services in future years.
And remember, one of the most important roles of the mayor and city council is the allocation of resources.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Your Honor. Brent, your presentation PowerPoint is a lot easier to follow than the backup. I read the backup 3 times because it had a lot of moving parts. But this makes a lot more sense. All we're doing is putting X number of dollars in buckets, and that's real easy to follow. I do have a specific question regarding the bankruptcy expenditures. I know that a lot of that money is going toward litigation issues. Any other items that we're using this money for?
There are a couple of bankruptcy settlement ongoing payments. That, we have a payment to PERS that goes out for a few more years, and we also have a payment to the fire groups for an agreement that was made. So there's some of those kinds of settlement payments as well that are there. So it's those kinds of fixed things plus the unknowns. There are claims that are still being worked through, certainly, and others probably know better than I do as to where that stands.
And although we exited bankruptcy successfully last year, there's still some pending items that we need to wrap up.
Yes.
And I just, because there was an article about this in a comment in the recent Register, it's not that we're not paying, there was a comment that we aren't able to pay our debt. That's not accurate.
I saw the
We're paying our
article.
debt. But some of it's not due and payable until certain milestones.
Right.
And then the other thing is we're still settling claims, and we're
Yes.
still negotiating with parties.
It's
So
ongoing.
It's ongoing. And again, we're hoping to get that done as quickly as possible because we really want to be able to look forward and not backwards.
I agree.
But we've got to, they've got to follow the process, and we've got to get through, systems work, and so we've got to go through that process and get it done. But it's not a function of not being able to pay it. It's a function of things not being due and payable yet.
And that's a big distinction.
Yes.
And just one final comment, I was one of the council members in 2012 that filed for bankruptcy. It was probably one of the most difficult decisions I've had to make. But we couldn't make payroll. We just couldn't pay people. The day we filed for bankruptcy, the next day, several staff exited. We had to buy our own coffee, our own personal items because we couldn't afford it. And the whole world was watching us to see how we would handle it. So we've come a long way, but I want to thank the staff for that because without your expertise, we wouldn't be here today with this kind of information or policy recommendation.
And that goes to why I think we feel more comfortable if there's 25% at a minimum in those funds that we can use for economic downturns and emergencies, because really the city didn't have anything to draw on.
Right. It's like a regular household budget. If you start writing checks and you don't have anything in your checking account, they're going to be bouncing. It's the same principle.
People will find it out.
Yeah, coins underneath the car. Thank you.
Councilman Barrios.
Thought just came to mind, and as far as franchise fees, where are those going? More specifically, the franchise fees that's collected every month by our towing companies.
Towing, that's, we say how are they being spent?
Well,
Or what line do they show up in, or what are you asking?
yeah, what line are they showing up, and what is being done with that money?
They're part of it's in the other taxes line. I mentioned when I was talking about property transfer tax is one of the reasons that other taxes line was up. There's the safety half-cent sales tax is in there. The property transfer tax and the towing fees are all make up that. Those are the three main things in that bucket.
And is that to support the police department?
No, it's just a general fund.
Why is it collected at the police department?
Well, it's a point of collection, but it's a general fund revenue that we can use to fund any governmental services.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was just finding it a little funny that the police department collecting it every month
Yeah,
and
but they,
giving it to the city.
But we make them turn it over to us each month.
I'm
I
sure.
make everyone turn all the money over to finance.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and it just, in their contract, it's their, because they work typically with the police department. But for instance, our Parks and Recreation Department collects certain fees at their facilities, but they're all remitted to the finance department and deposited and then put into the various buckets so we can account for them.
Okay. No, I know that's like about $720,000 a year that's collected, and just wondering where it goes. That's all. Thank you,
Goes into
Mayor.
the coffee.
All
Armored
right,
truck
any other
goes and picks it up.
discussions or questions? Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? Call for the vote?
Yes. Just in time.
Thank you.
Yes to what, Henry?
They're on the next item.
Yes to, we're going to use your council allowance to fund the reserve?
On item 19, the motion to approve was made by Mr. Valdivia, the second by Mr. Barrios, and the item passes 5-0.
All right. I do believe it's appropriate, given what Councilman Nichol talked about as far as discipline, that it related to also the ability for the council to stay in their lanes when it comes to recommendations that are made by the staff and council, because there's been opportunities when you have stepped beyond those bounds, and I suggest that you be very cautious when you do that, recognizing that you're bringing on liability. And so staying within the bounds that you have to recognize that the staff is bringing forward to you recommendations based on findings, because there have been times when this council has overridden staff's recommendations and potentially to the liability of the city. So next is item number 20.
20. Mayor, members of the council, before we actually begin this presentation, I wanted to alert you that we did provide a revised report, and I want to just explain why. The report that was inadvertently included in your packet included some estimated costs. We're not really sure that we're going to be able to achieve those. Really what we're asking this evening for is authority to go out and collect the data that we need in order to really do that analysis for you. But as the council is aware, we recognize that if we're going to rebuild the city, create a vibrant environment, we want to encourage investment in our city, and part of the way we do that is to ensure that it's a safe, clean, attractive community. We recognize that our police department, like every other city department, has suffered cuts, and we're looking for ways to ensure that we have the officers available to respond to the community's issues in a timely manner and provide the kind of service that we would all want if we were the victims of crimes. We realize we have limited resources, and to the Mayor Pro Tem's comment, we're trying to be as judicious as we can in everything that we recommend, realizing there are limitations, and we need to demonstrate to the community that we can use the resources that they are giving to us in the most effective way possible. So we've been looking for ways to improve the efficiency of all of our departments. As part of my efforts to try to engage all the employees about the changes in the culture, the expectations of the mayor and city council, the new form of government, and what their obligations are to this community, I've had a chance to talk to many employees. And I appreciate the fact that it was really in one of those discussions at the police department where an officer said, hey, what about this? And we've been able to take a look at that, and we think we have some good opportunities here. So with that, the chief and Captain Green are going to walk through one opportunity. We have some work still to do on this, but we think that there's a unique opportunity to redeploy our officers in a more effective way.
You stole my intro.
Uh-oh. You can come up with a new one on the fly.
All right. So as the city manager indicated, this really is about efficiencies, and it's about returning a program to our police operations that we believe will provide efficiencies in the form of improving our patrol response times. What it really is to start an official discussion about either creating a jail transportation service for people that are arrested or reopening our city jail. And also having the transportation service in conjunction with that. By way of history, when the police station was built in the mid-1990s, there is a jail facility in the station. It was certified for essentially short-term holds. We could take somebody there, we could book them. They were there for a very limited period of time, in many cases just for several hours, and then they were transported to either West Valley Detention Center or a Central Detention Center. In 2009, as a result of some of the budget cuts, the decision was made to close that jail and realize the savings to maintain field services as much as possible at that time. In the meantime, that jail has essentially sat vacant in our police station. At one time, it became a storage closet in many ways. It's since been cleaned out. Yeah. No. So several months ago, we asked staff to start to dig into this and take a look at it. And we did some analysis work that, or let me back up a little bit more. When somebody is actually arrested in the city, an officer makes an arrest, there are a couple different things that can happen with that particular person. Depending upon the nature of the charges and depending upon the physical condition of that suspect would determine what we will ultimately do with them. So most efficient way to get an officer back into the field is if it's a low-level misdemeanor type charge where the officer can just simply issue a cite release for that misdemeanor charge and kick the person loose right there, and the officer goes back out in the field. Worst case scenario is felony charge. It's going to require a booking, and then if the person has any type of medical issues whatsoever, whether it be high blood pressure or an injury of some sort, it requires that we would at minimum have to take them to West Valley Detention Center, because there's a difference between Central Detention Center and West Valley that the county runs in terms of who they will accept for booking. And people with some medical issues are going to be required to go to West Valley versus Central. And then in addition to that, depending upon the nature of potential injuries or medical issues, the jail might not accept that prisoner and might instruct the officer to take that prisoner to county hospital or Arrowhead Regional Hospital to have that person cleared for booking by medical staff. So in some cases, these processes on a single arrest can take hours and hours and hours, of which takes an officer out of the field. When we had the jail open before, we, even as a city, had to abide by those things too. We weren't going to accept the liability of somebody with significant medical issues when they came to our facility. It still might require a jail check, but at minimum, it was a more efficient process where an officer was never having to drive all the way to Rancho Cucamonga or to West Valley Detention Center. They were able to take them directly to our jail, and then ultimately that transportation would be done by a less expensive alternative, which was a contract service for the folks that ran our jail and did the transportation stuff. In the analysis work that we did, we looked at the total number of arrests that we made last year, and based upon those total number of arrests, we took a sampling, and that sampling included everything from hospital transports to Central Detention Center transports to West Valley transports. And we came up with what we believe is an accurate representation of over 17,000 hours of police officer time that was spent in the arrest and booking process, which is the equivalent of 8.5 full-time equivalent police officers. So you can see where there can be some natural efficiencies built in by creating a less expensive model, either reopening our jail or just simply creating that transportation model where a less expensive entity would take that prisoner from the officer and take him to the hospital, will allow the officers to quickly clear those calls and get back in service, available to handle other needs that we need a police officer to do. So what this really is an ask of the council for us to officially move forward with soliciting bids and further analyzing this to essentially, whether we realize that there are significant savings in that or not, allow the city manager to issue those RFPs, and ultimately, if we through that analysis and by the collection of those RFPs, if we think there's efficiencies there, we will bring that forward to you. Just by point of order real quickly, our existing jail, I did mention that it is closed. We did some analysis work on what we believe will be required to get it reopened. There are some repairs that need to be made. There's some upgrades to infrastructure, locking mechanisms, the computer systems, all those types of things. So there is going to be at least a minimum, a one-time cost that would be associated with bringing the jail back up to a standard by which it can be open, and then obviously the annual maintenance cost of that facility. Both models, whether it's the jail and transportation or just the transportation, will require the labor costs, which we believe we can handle through a contract with another organization to essentially take care of that transport to the field and provide those efficiencies for our officers.
So essentially, the opportunity exists for having the city's sworn officers on the beat for more time in the course of their shift.
Exactly. The concept is to keep the officers in the city and keep them available to handling active calls as much as possible versus handling the more mundane process associated with booking.
So I know you haven't done the analysis yet and you don't have the RFP, but it will result in an additional expenditure because you're going to continue to pay the labor for the patrol.
Right.
This is going to add some additional cost, but in, I think, the vein that the city manager has put forward in the past, where there's some costs that, in order for us to achieve that level of safety within our community, you need to do it, even though you may be incurring some additional costs. Those costs would allow you to potentially provide for a safer community by having more of those police officers on patrol and being able to potentially even reduce the time for calls and the response time. So the net benefit isn't just the cost factor.
No, and in effect, we think that there's a possibility that by adding some additional contract costs, which would be significantly less than adding police officers, that we can return 8 police officers back to the field. So rather than hiring 8 more, we think we can come up with another alternative to get 8 back into the field more and keep them in the field.
Very good. Thank you.
But again, we're asking for authority to do the analysis.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very, very pleased to see this, and I want to just compliment our police department and our city manager and our staff. Thank you. I really, as I've heard through the community, that the vast need for citizens to get a patrol car to their home or to their business or to their emergency. So I'm grateful. Thank you for thinking outside of the box. Thank you for reviving the conversation of reopening our city jail. That is important. I think if there's consensus here, I'd like to push item number on packet page 595, the jail operation and transportation services model. I think you need both, and I think our community deserves it. Yes, there's capital outlay, but there's still savings even on the old agenda packet, which is what I have.
Right.
Minus, if I may, the jail van. I'm sorry.
And this is why I say.
If I could just make my, just let me, the jail van for $62,000, and I shared this with you offline, but I really would like to push option 2. You need both, and I want to give our patrolmen the opportunity to excel and serve our residents, and so I would be in favor of that, minus the jail van. Frankly, if we can, with less liability, I went to city yards the other day, and I just roamed around, and I saw, I'm not saying that we should use one of those, but there's no extra privileges here. We need to send a strong signal to the criminal element in our community, and I don't think they deserve new vans and new this and that. Let's get our patrolmen the necessary tools to do their job, to do it faster and quicker, and I'm just glad to see this. Is there support from our labor group and POA?
It was raised at a meeting. An officer brought it to my attention. So.
Okay.
The other.
By way of clarification, option 2 I don't think is necessarily including a van. This document that you're making reference to isn't really part of what you're going to go out for.
I want to go back, and I apologize for the clerical error.
Sure.
The numbers should have never been provided to the mayor and city council, and I apologize because it was out of our office where there was a mix-up in the versions. Those are numbers that we just did some preliminary research, so I don't know that we can even deliver those numbers. What I'm seeking authority to do is to do an RFP that gives us the chance to identify all 3 of those options, the necessary services, and then we will come back with numbers to you. And I agree, I'm going to be hard-pressed to make a recommendation that we allow someone else to drive our city vehicles. So again, we have a lot of work to do. I'm seeking authority to go out and get the data.
How soon can we get, I mean, if you were given the authority tonight, can we get some back before the council quick? I mean, how soon?
Well, we're going to move as quickly as we can because we think there's huge opportunities here. We just need to give the companies a chance to respond. We want to make sure we get it out because there are lots of companies that do this. So we're going to push it as fast as we can, about 4 weeks out on the street, so give people a chance to respond, and then we'll process the numbers very quickly and return to you.
So it's going to be a working Christmas for all those who want to respond.
That's right. And, again, because
That's good. That's their
we
business. So
that's right.
good. That's how they eat and make money. So respond.
Right.
But I really would love to see some cost options back to us. I favor the jail management and transport services, but I'll leave it to you to provide those numbers to us. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion? We have a motion. We have a second. Call for the vote.
On item 20, the motion to approve was made by Mr. Valdivia, the second by Ms. Marquez, and the item passes 5-0.
Thank you. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to issue a challenge to each of the council members to join me tomorrow morning and participate in the turkey trot. I know that we've had fun doing that in the past, but it's a fun event, and
I know the
anybody
city
that wants
attorney
to
got out of here before you challenged him.
So I issue that challenge. I will be in the relay and will be in the turkey trot. It may be partially walked, but we will be participating. I know Councilmember Barrios has participated in the vast. Councilman Nickel, Councilman Mulvihill has participated, and so anybody who'd like to take me up on that challenge, you're You're welcome to register tomorrow. There's still time. And I think we've got some competitors over there from the Tutu crowd. So, and again, want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. To give thanks and recommendation or acknowledgement to the many blessings that we have in our community, and be thankful for life and for family and for all those opportunities that we are given each day to make a contribution to bettering our society and especially our community here in San Bernardino. So, City Manager wants to get in the last word.
No, you can have the last word, but I do want to tell you about a couple of exciting things. One, just so people can plan, we're doing free pet adoptions on December 15th, and while we want you to be cautious about buying puppies and kittens for pets and make sure that you realize that it's a lifetime commitment, but still we are going to offer those free of charge on December 15th, and hopefully we have a lot of good animals that get great loving homes. And I won't go there because I'll take all of them home with me. So, but that's another story. The other two items, Public Works has done a remarkable job. We've identified some light standards, temporary light standards, and we're placing those at the highest propensity dumping sites in the community, hoping that that has an impact on reducing dumping in those areas. And then you, when you're traveling around the community, please do look, and I only have a little copy of this, I'm sorry, but we've launched a new campaign, signage. Clean up your junk, don't dump, report illegal dumping when it happens, and we've created a hashtag, only chumps dump. And so we're we're hoping that that helps spread the word. You know, that's in addition to increased enforcement, prosecution of people. You know, the city attorney and I are having some discussions about, you know, maybe once we prosecute people, maybe, you know, saying you don't want to be this guy that just got the $1,000 fine. So again, we're talking about how we can do that and not violate people's privacy, but really want to try to address the problem and not keep responding to the same places over and over again. So just those minor things.
Can you have that translated in several different languages?
Yeah. I couldn't read any of them other than the English one. So. Okay.
Councilman Nickel.
Yeah, just real quick, I got a email this week from the League of California Cities. I've been asked to attend the League Leaders Workshop next Wednesday through Friday. This workshop is part of the process of establishing the 2019 policy and legislative priorities for the League. The League will cover these costs, so there is no cost to the city. But I did want to encourage my colleagues and staff, if you have any input that I should be taking to this event, we'll be meeting in Garden Grove. Again, that will be next Wednesday evening through Friday. And I'll be happy to pass along whatever comments, concerns, or priorities you have for the next year. Thanks.
All right, no other comments or discussion. This meeting is adjourned until Wednesday, December 5th.